Chapter 3.32 Part 5 of Personal Narrative of Travels to the Equinoctial Regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, Volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt, translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.32 Part 5. If, to complete the sketch of the structure of the Andes from Tierra del Fuego to the northern polar sea, we pass the boundaries of South America, we find that the western Cordillera of New Granada, after a great depression between the mouth of the Atrato and the Gulf of Cupica, again rises in the Isthmus of Panama to 80 or 100 toises high, augmenting towards the west in the Cordilleras of Veragua and Salamanca, and extending by Guatemala as far as the confines of Mexico. Note: if it be true, as some navigators affirm, that the mountains at the northwestern extremity of the Republic of Colombia, known by the names of Silla de Veragua and Castillo del Choco, be visible at 36 leagues distance, the elevation of their summits must be nearly 1,400 toises, little lower than the Silla of Caracas. End of note. Within this space, it extends along the coast of the Pacific where, from the Gulf of Nicoya to Soconusco, latitude 9 1/2 to 16 degrees, is found a long series of volcanoes, most frequently insulated and sometimes linked to spurs or lateral branches. Note: see the list of 21 volcanoes of Guatemala, partly extinct and partly still burning, given by Arago and myself in the Annulaire du Bureau des Longitudes pour 1824, page 175. No mountain of Guatemala having been hitherto measured, it is the more important to fix approximately the height of the Volcán de Agua, or the Volcano of Pacaya, and the Volcán de Fuego, called also Volcano of Guatemala. Mr. Juarros expressly says that this volcano which, by torrents of water and stones, destroyed on the 11th September, 1541, the Ciudad Vieja, or Almolonga, the ancient capital of the country, which must not be confounded with the ancient Guatemala, is covered with snow during several months of the year. This phenomenon would seem to indicate a height of more than 1,750 toises. End of note. Passing the isthmus of Tehuantepec-Huascacualco, on the Mexican territory, the Cordillera of Central America extends on toward the Intendencia of Oaxaca, at an equal distance from the two oceans. Then, from 18 1/2 to 21 degrees latitude, from Mixteca to the mines of Zimpana, it approximates to the east coast. Nearly in the parallel of the city of Mexico, between Toluca, Jalapa, and Cordoba, it attains its maximum height, several colossal summits rising to 2,400 and 2,770 toises. Farther north, the chain called Sierra Madre runs north 40 degrees west toward San Miguel el Grande and Guanajuato. Near the latter town, latitude 21 degrees 0 minutes 15 seconds, where the richest silver mines of the known world are situated, it widens in an extraordinary degree and separates into 3 branches. The most eastern branch advances toward Charcas and the Real de Catorce, and lowers progressively, turning to northeast, in the ancient kingdom of Leon, in the province of Coahuila and Texas. That branch is prolonged from the Rio Colorado to Texas, crossing the Arkansas near the confluence of the Mississippi and the Missouri, latitude 38 degrees 51 minutes. In those countries it bears the name of the mountains of Ozark, and attains 300 toises of height. Note: Ozark is at once the ancient name of Arkansas and of the tribe Quapaw Indians who inhabit the banks of that great river. The culminant point of the mountains of Ozark is in latitude 37 1/2 degrees, between the sources of the White and Osage rivers. End of note. It has been supposed that on the east of the Mississippi, latitude 44 to 46 degrees, the Wisconsin hills, which stretch out to north-northeast in the direction of Lake Superior, may be a continuation of the mountains of Ozark. Their metallic wealth seems to denote that they are a prolongation of the eastern Cordillera of Mexico. The western branch, or Cordillera, occupies a part of the province of Guadalajara, and stretches by Culiacan, Aripe, and the auriferous lands of the Pimeria Alta and La Sonora, as far as the banks of the Rio Gila, latitude 33 to 34 degrees, one of the most ancient dwellings of the Aztec nations. We shall soon see that this western chain appears to be linked by the spurs that advance to the west with the maritime Alps of California. Finally, the central Cordillera of Anahuac, which is the most elevated, runs first from southeast to northwest by Zacatecas toward Durango, and afterwards from south to north by Chihuahua towards New Mexico. It takes successively the names of Sierra de Hacha, Sierra de los Mimbres, Sierra Verde, and Sierra de las Gruas, and about the 29 and 39 degrees of latitude, it is connected by spurs with two lateral chains, those of the Texas and La Sonora, which renders the separation of the chains more imperfect than the trifurcations of the Andes in South America. That part of the Cordilleras of Mexico, which is richest in silver beds and veins, is comprehended between the parallels of Oaxaca and Cosequiriachi, latitude 16.5 to 29 degrees. The alluvial soil that contains disseminated gold extends some degrees still further northward. It is a very striking phenomenon that the gold washing of Sinaloa and Sonora, like that of Barbacoas and Choco, on the south and north of the Isthmus of Panama, is uniformly situated on the west of the central chain, on the descent opposite the Pacific. The traces of a still burning volcanic fire, which was no longer seen on a length of 200 leagues from Pasto and Popayan to the Gulf of Nicoya, latitude 1 1/4 to 9 1/2 degrees, become very frequent on the western coast of Guatemala, latitude 9 1/2 to 16 degrees. These traces of fire again cease in the gneiss granite mountains of Oaxaca and reappear, perhaps for the last time, toward the north in the central Cordillera of Anahuac between latitude 18 1/4 and 19 1/2 degrees, while the volcanoes of Tatla, Orizpa, Popocatépetl, Toluca, Jorullo, and Colima appear to be situated in a crevice extending from east-southeast to west-northwest, from one ocean to the other. Note: on this zone of volcanoes is the parallel of the greatest heights of New Spain. If the survey of Captain Basil Hall afford results alike certain in latitude and in longitude, the volcano of Colima is north of the parallel of Puerto de Navidad, in latitude 19 degrees 36 minutes, and, like the volcano of Tutla, if not beyond the zone, at least beyond the average parallel of the volcanic fire of Mexico, which parallel seems to be between 18 degrees 59 minutes and 19 degrees 12 minutes. End of note. This line of summits, several of which enter the limit of perpetual snow, and which are the loftiest of the Cordilleras from the peak of Tolima, latitude 40 degrees 46 minutes north, is almost perpendicular to the great axis of the chain of Guatemala and Anahuac, advancing to the 27th parallel, uniformly north 42 degrees east. A characteristic feature of every knot or widening of the Cordilleras is that the grouping of the summits is independent of the general direction of the axis. The backs of the mountains in New Spain form very elevated plains, along which carriages can roll for an extent of 400 leagues from the capital of Santa Fe and Taos, near the sources of Rio del Norte. This immense tableland, in 19 and 24.5 degrees, is constantly at the height of from 950 to 1200 toises, that is, at the elevation of the passes of the Great St. Bernard and the Splugen. We find on the back of the Cordilleras of Anahuac, which lower progressively from the city of Mexico toward Taos, a succession of basins. They are separated by hills little striking to the eye of the traveller, because they rise only from 250 to 400 toises above the surrounding plains. The basins are sometimes closed, like the valley of Tenochtitlan, where lie the great alpine lakes, and sometimes they exhibit traces of ancient ejections, destitute of water. Between latitude 33 and 38 degrees, the Rio del Norte forms, in its upper course, a great longitudinal valley, and the central chain seems here to be divided into several parallel ranges. This distribution continues northward in the Rocky Mountains, where, between the parallels of 37 and 41 degrees, several summits covered with eternal snow, Spanish Peak, James Peak, and Bighorn, are from 1600 to 1870 toises of absolute height. Note: the Rocky Mountains have been at different periods designated by the names Chipewyan, Missouri, Columbian, Caos, Stony, Shining, and Sandy Mountains. End of note. Toward latitude 40 degrees south of the sources of the Paducah, a tributary of the Rio de la Plata, A branch, known by the names of the Black Hills, detaches itself toward the northeast from the central chain. The Rocky Mountains at first seem to lower considerably in 46 and 48 degrees, and then rise to 48 and 49 degrees, where their tops are from 1200 to 1300 toises, and their ridge near 950 toises. Between the sources of the Missouri and the River Lewis, one of the tributaries of the Oregon or Columbia, the Cordilleras form in widening an elbow resembling the knot of Cusco. There also, on the eastern declivity of the Rocky Mountains, is the partition of water between the Caribbean Sea and the Polar Sea. This point corresponds with those in the Andes of South America at the spur of Cochabamba on the east, latitude 19 degrees, 20 minutes south, and in the Alto de los Robles, latitude 2 degrees, 20 minutes north, on the west. The ridge that separates the Rocky Mountains extends from west to east toward Lake Superior, between the basins of the Missouri and those of Lake Winnipeg and the Slave Lake. The Central Cordillera of Mexico and the Rocky Mountains follow the direction north 10 degrees west, from latitude 25 to 38 degrees. The chain from that point to the Polar Sea prolongs in the direction north 24 degrees west, and ends in the parallel 69 degrees at the mouth of the Mackenzie River. Note: the eastern boundary of the Rocky Mountains lies in 38 degrees latitude, 107 degrees, 20 minutes longitude, in 40 degrees latitude, 108 degrees, 30 minutes longitude, in 63 degrees latitude, 124 degrees, 40 minutes longitude, in 68 degrees latitude, 130 degrees, 30 minutes longitude. End of note. In thus developing the structure of the Cordilleras of the Andes, from 56 degrees south to beyond the Arctic Circle, we see that its northern extremity, longitude 130 degrees 30 minutes, is nearly 61 degrees of longitude west of its southern extremity, longitude 60 degrees 40 minutes. This is the effect of the long-continued direction from southeast to northwest, north of the Isthmus of Panama. By the extraordinary breadth of the new continent, in the 30 and 60 degrees north latitude, the Cordillera of the Andes, continually approaching nearer to the western coast in the southern hemisphere, is removed 400 leagues on the north from the source of the Rio de la Paz. The Andes of Chile may be considered as maritime Alps. Note: geognostically speaking, a littoral chain is not a range of mountains forming of itself the coast. This name is extended to a chain separated from the coast by a narrow plain. End of note. While, in their most northern continuation, the Rocky Mountains are a chain in the interior of a continent. There is no doubt, between latitude 23 and 60 degrees, from Cape St. Lucas in California to Alaska on the western coast of the Sea of Kamchatka, a real littoral cordillera, but it forms a system of mountains almost entirely distinct from the Andes of Mexico and Canada. This system, which we shall call the Cordillera of California or of New Albion, is linked between latitude 33 and 34 degrees with the Pimeria Alta and the western branch of the Cordilleras of Anahuac, and between latitude 45 and 53 degrees with the Rocky Mountains by transversal ridges and spurs that widen toward the east. Travelers who may at some future time pass over the unknown land between Cape Mendocino and the source of the Rio Colorado may perhaps inform us whether the connection of the maritime Alps of California or New Albion with the western branch of the Cordilleras of Mexico resembles that which, notwithstanding the depression, or rather total interruption observed on the west of the Rio Atrato, is admitted by geographers to exist between the mountains of the Isthmus of Panama and the western branch of the Andes of New Granada. The maritime Alps in the peninsula of Old California rise progressively toward the north in the Sierra of Santa Lucia, latitude 34½ degrees, in the Sierra of San Marcos, latitude 37 to 38 degrees, and in the Snowy Mountains near Cape Mendocino, latitude 39 degrees 41 minutes. The last seem to attain at least the height of 1,500 toises. From Cape Mendocino the chain follows the coast of the Pacific, but at the distance of from 20 to 25 leagues. Between the lofty summits of Mount Hood and Mount St. Helen, in latitude 45¾ degrees, the chain is broken by the river Columbia. In New Hanover, New Cornwall, and New Norfolk, these rents of a rocky coast are repeated. these geologic phenomena of the fjords that characterize western Patagonia and Norway. At the point where the Cordillera turns toward the west, latitude 53 3/4 degrees, longitude 139 degrees 40 minutes, there are two volcanic peaks, one of which, Mount St. Elias, perhaps equals Cotopaxi in height, the other, Fairweather Mountain, equals the height of Mount Rosa. The elevation of the former exceeds all the summits of the Cordilleras of Mexico and the Rocky Mountains, north of the parallel 19 1/4 degrees. It is even the culminant point in the northern hemisphere of the whole known world north of 50 degrees of latitude. Northwest of the peaks of St. Elias and Fairweather, the chain of California widens considerably in the interior of Russian America. Volcanoes multiply in number as we advance westward, in the peninsula of Alaska and the Fox Islands, where the volcano Ajegadan rises to the height of 1,175 toises above the level of the sea. Thus the chain of the maritime Alps of California appears to be undermined by subterraneous fires at its two extremities, on the north in 60 degrees of latitude, and on the south in 28 degrees in the volcanoes of the Virgins. Note: Volcanes de las Virgenes. The highest summit of Old California, the Cerro de la Giganta, 700 toises, appears to be also an extinguished volcano. End of note. If it were certain that the mountains of California belong to the western branch of the Andes of Anahuac, it might be said that the volcanic fire still burning abandons the central Cordillera when it recedes from the coast, that is, from the volcano of Colima, and that the fire is borne on the northwest by the peninsula of Old California, Mount St. Elias, and the peninsula of Alaska toward the Aleutian Islands and Kamchatka. I shall terminate this sketch of the structure of the Andes by recapitulating the principal features that characterize the Cordilleras northwest of Darien. Latitude 8 to 11 degrees, mountains of the Isthmus of Panama, Veragua, and Costa Rica, slightly linked to the western chain of New Granada, that is, of Choco. Latitude 11 to 16 degrees, mountains of Nicaragua and Guatemala, line of volcanoes north 50 degrees west, for the most part still burning, from the Gulf of Nicoya to the volcano of Soconusco. Latitude 16 to 18 degrees, mountains of gneiss granite in the province of Oaxaca. Latitude 18.5 to 19.5 degrees, trachytic knot of Anahuac, parallel with the Nevados and the burning volcanoes of Mexico. Latitude 19.5 to 20 degrees, knot of the metalliferous mountains of Guanajuato and Zacatecas. Latitude 21 3/4 to 22 degrees, division of the Andes of Anahuac into three chains. Eastern chain, that of Potosi in Texas, continued by the Ozark and Wisconsin mountains as far as Lake Superior. Central chain, of Durango, New Mexico, and the Rocky Mountains, sending on the north of the source of the River Plate, latitude 42 degrees, a branch, the Black Hills, to northeast, widening greatly between the parallels of 46 and 50 degrees, and lowering progressively as it approaches the mouth of the Mackenzie River, latitude 68 degrees. Western chain of Sinaloa and Sonora, linked by spurs to the maritime Alps or mountains of California. We have yet no means of judging, with precision, the elevation of the Andes south of the knot of the mountains of Loja, south latitude 3 degrees 5. But we know that on the north of that knot, the Cordilleras rise 5 times higher than the majestic elevation of 2,600 toises. In the group of Quito, 0 to 2 degrees south latitude, Chimborazo, Antisano, Cayambe, Cotopaxi, Coyanis, Iliniza, Sangay, Tungurahua. In the group of Cundinamarca, latitude 4 3/4 degrees north, peak of Tolima, north of the Andes of Quindú. In the group of Anahuac, from latitude 18 degrees 59 minutes to 19 degrees 12 minutes, Popocatépetl, or the Great Volcano of Mexico, and peak of Orizaba. If we consider the maritime Alps or mountains of California and New Norfolk either as a continuation of the western chain of Mexico, that of Sonora, or as being linked by spurs to the central chain, that of the Rocky Mountains, we may add to the three preceding groups. The group of Russian America, from latitude 60 to 70 degrees, Mount St. Elias. Over an extent of 63 degrees of latitude, I know only 12 summits of the Andes which reach the height of 2,600 toises and consequently exceed by 140 toises the height of Mont Blanc. Only 3 of these 12 summits are situated north of the Isthmus of Panama. End of chapter 3.32, part 5. Chapter 3.32, part 6, of Personal Narrative of Travels to the Equinoctial Regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, Volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt, translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.32, Part 6. 2. Insulated Group of the Snowy Mountains of Santa Marta. In the enumeration of the different systems of mountains, I place this group before the littoral chain of Venezuela, though the latter, being a northern prolongation of the Cordillera of Cundinamarca, is immediately linked with the chain of the Andes. The Sierra Nevada of Santa Marta is encompassed within 2 divergent branches of the Andes, that of Bogota and that of the Isthmus of Panama. It rises abruptly, like a fortified castle, amidst the plains extending from the Gulf of Darien by the mouth of the Magdalena to the lake of Maracaibo. The old geographers erroneously considered this insulated group of mountains covered with eternal snow as the extremity of the high Cordilleras of Chita and Pamplona. The loftiest ridge of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta is only 3 or 4 leagues in length from east to west. It is bounded, at 9 leagues distance from the coast, by the meridians of the capes of San Diego and San Agustin. The culminant points, El Picacho and Horqueta, are near the western border of the group. They are entirely separated from the peak of San Lorenzo, also covered with eternal snow, but only 4 leagues distant from the port of Santa Marta, toward the southeast. I saw this latter peak from the heights that surround the village of Turbaco, south of Cartagena. No precise measurement has hitherto given us the height of the Sierra Nevada, which Dampier affirms to be one of the highest mountains of the northern hemisphere. Calculations founded on the maximum of distance at which the group is discerned at sea give a height of more than 3,004 toises. That the group of the mountains of Santa Marta is insulated is provided by the hot climate of the lands, tierras calientes, that surround it. Low ridges and a succession of hills indicate perhaps an ancient connection between the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta on one side by the Altos de las Minas with the phonolitic and granitic rocks of the Peñon and Banca, and on the other by the Sierra de Perijá with the mountains of Chiliguana and Ocana, which are the spurs of the eastern chain of the Andes of New Granada. In this latter chain the febrifuge species of cinchona, Corollus hirsutus, Staminibus inclusus, are found in the Sierra Nevada de Merida, but the real cinchona, the most northern of South America, is found in the temperate region of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. This is the system of mountains, the configuration and direction of which have excited so powerful an influence on the cultivation and commerce of the ancient Capitania General of Venezuela. It bears different names, as the mountains of Coro, of Caracas, of the Bergantin, of Barcelona, of Cumaná, and of Paria. But all these names belong to the same chain, of which the northern part runs along the coast of the Caribbean Sea. This system of mountains, which is 160 leagues long, is a prolongation of the eastern Cordillera of the Andes of Cundinamarca. Note: it is more than double the length of the Pyrenees, from Cape Creux to the point of Figuera. End of note. There is an immediate connection of the littoral chain with the Andes, like that of the Pyrenees with the mountains of Asturia and Galicia. It is not the effect of transversal ridges, like the connection of the Pyrenees with the Swiss Alps by the Black Mountain and the Cevennes. The points of junction are between Trujillo and the Lake of Valencia. The eastern chain of New Granada stretches northeast by the Sierra Nevada de Merida, as well as by the 4 paramos of Timotes, Niquitao, Bocona, and Las Rosas, of which the absolute height cannot be less than from 1,400 to 1,600 toises. After the paramo of Las Rosas, which is more elevated than the 2 preceding, there is a great depression, and we no longer see a distinct chain or ridge, but merely hills and high tablelands surrounding the towns of Tucuyo and Barquisimeto. We know not the height even of Cerro de Altar between Tucuyo and Caranacatu, but we know by recent measures that the most inhabited spots are from 300 to 350 toises above sea level. The limits of the mountainous land between Tocuyo and the valleys of Aragua are the plains of San Carlos on the south and the Rio Tocuyo on the north. The Rio Siquisique flows into that river. From the Cerro de Altar on the northeast towards Guigua and Valencia succeed, as culminant points, the mountains of Santa Marta, between Buria and Nirgua, then the Picacho de Nirgua, supposed to be 600 toises high, and finally Las Palermas and El Torito, between Valencia and Nirgua. The line of water partition runs from west to east, from Quibor to the lofty savannas of London near Santa Rosa. The waters flow on the north towards the Golfo Triste of the Caribbean Sea, and on the south toward the basins of the Apure and the Orinoco. The whole of this mountainous country, by which the littoral chain of Caracas is linked to the Cordilleras of Cundinamarca, was celebrated in Europe in the middle of the 19th century for that part of the territory formed of gneiss granite and lying between the Rio Tocuyo and the Rio Yaraqui, contains the auriferous veins of Buria and the copper mine of Aroa, which is worked at the present day. If, across the knot of the mountains of Barquisimeto, we trace the meridians of Aroa, Nirgua, and San Carlos, we find that on the northwest, that knot is linked with the Sierra de Coro, and on the northeast with the mountains of Capare, Porto Cabello, and the Villa de Cura. It may be said to form the eastern wall of that vast circular depression, of which the lake of Maracaibo is the center, and which is bounded on the south and west by the mountains of Merida, Ocana, Parija, and Santa Marta. The littoral chain of Venezuela presents toward the center and the east the same phenomenon of structure as those observed in the Andes of Peru and New Granada, namely, the division into several parallel ranges and the frequency of longitudinal basins or valleys. But the eruptions of the Caribbean Sea having apparently overwhelmed, at a very remote period, a part of the mountains of the shore, the ranges or partial chains are interrupted, and some basins have become oceanic gulfs. To comprehend the Cordillera of Venezuela in mass, we must carefully study the direction and windings of the coast, from Punta Tucacas, west of Porto Cabello, as far as Punta de la Galera, of the island of Trinidad. That island, those of Los Testigos, Margarita, and Tortuga constitute, with the mica slates of the peninsula of Araya, one and the same system of mountains. The granitic rocks which appear between Buria, Dauca, and Aroa cross the valley of the Rio Yaraqui, and draw near the shore, whence they extend, like a continuous wall from Porto Cabello to Cape Codera. This prolongation forms the northern chain of the Cordillera of Venezuela, and is traversed in going from south to north, either from Valencia and the valleys of Aragua to Burburata and Turiamo, or from Caracas to La Guaira. Hot springs issue from those mountains, those of Las Trincheras, 90.4 degrees, on its southern slope, and those of Onoto and Mariara on its southern slope. Note: the other hot springs of the Cordillera of the shore are those of San Juan, Provisor, Bergantin, the Gulf of Cariaco, Cumacatar, and Irapa. Messrs. Rivero and Bosingo, who visited the thermal waters of Mariara in February 1823, during their journey from Caracas to Santa Fe de Bogota, found their maximum to be 64 degrees centigrade. I found it at the same season only 59.2 degrees. Has the great earthquake of the 26th March, 1812, had an influence on the temperature of these springs? The able chemists above mentioned were, like myself, struck with the extreme purity of the hot waters that issue from the primitive rocks of the basin of Aragua. Those of Onoto, which flow at the height of 360 toises above the level of the sea, have no smell of sulphuretted hydrogen. They are without taste and cannot be precipitated either by nitrate of silver or any other reagent. When evaporated, they have an inappreciable residue which consists of a little silica and a trace of alkali. Their temperature is only 44.5 degrees, and the bubbles of air which are disengaged at intervals are at Onoto, as well as in the thermal waters of Mariara, pure nitrogen. The waters of Mariara, 244 toises, have a faint smell of sulphuretted hydrogen. They leave by evaporation a slight residuum that yields carbonic acid, sulfuric acid, soda, magnesia, and lime. The quantities are so small that the water is altogether without taste. In the course of my journey, I found only the springs of Comanguillas hotter than the thermal waters of Las Trincheras. They are situated on the south of Porto Cabello. The waters of Comanguillas are at the height of 1,040 toises, and are alike remarkable for their purity and their temperature of 96.3 degrees centigrade. End of note. The former issue from a granite with large grains, very regularly stratified. The latter from a rock of gneiss. What especially characterizes the northern chain is a summit which is not only the loftiest of the system of mountains of Venezuela, but of all South America on the east of the Andes. The eastern summit of the Silla of Caracas, according to my barometric measurement made in 1800, is 1,350 toises high. Note: the Silla of Caracas is only 80 toises lower than the Carigou in the Pyrenees. End of note. And notwithstanding the commotion which took place on the Silla during the great earthquake of Caracas, that mountain did not sink 50 or 60 toises, as some North American journals asserted. 4 or 5 leagues south of the northern chain, that of Mariara, La Silla, and Cape Codera, the mountains of Quiripa, Ocumare, and Panaquire form the southern chain of the coast, which stretches in a parallel direction from Guigua to the mouth of the Rio Tuy, from the Cuesta of Yusma and the Guaquimo. The latitudes of the Villa de Cura and San Juan, so erroneously marked on our maps, enabled me to ascertain the mean breadth of the whole Cordillera of Venezuela. 10 or 12 leagues may be reckoned as the distance from the descent of the northern chain, which bounds the Caribbean Sea, to the descent of the southern chain, bounding the immense basin of the Llanos. This latter chain, which also bears the name of the Inland Mountains, is much lower than the northern chain, and I can hardly believe that the Sierra de Guairima attains a height of 1,200 toises. The two partial chains, that of the interior and that which runs along the coast, are linked by a ridge or knot of mountains known by the names of Altos de las Coquizas, 845 toises, and the Higuerota, 835 toises, between Los Teques and La Victoria, in a longitude 69 degrees 30 minutes and 69 degrees 50 minutes. On the west of this ridge lies the enclosed basin of the Lake of Valencia, or the Valles de Aragua. Note: this basin contains a small system of inland rivers, which do not communicate with the ocean. The southern chain of the littoral Cordillera of Venezuela is so depressed on the southwest that the Rio Pao is separated from the tributary streams of the Lake of Tacarigua, or Valencia. Towards the east of the Rio Tuy, which takes its rise on the western declivity of the knot of mountains of Los Coquizas, appears at first to empty itself into the valleys of Aragua, but hills of calcareous tufa, forming a ridge between Consejo and Victoria, force it to take its course southeast. End of note. And on the east the basin of Caracas and of the Rio Tuy. The bottom of the first mentioned basins is between 220 and 250 toises high. The bottom of the latter is 460 toises above the level of the Caribbean Sea. It follows from these measures that the most western of the two longitudinal valleys enclosed by the littoral Cordillera is the deepest, while in the plains near the Apure and the Orinoco the declivity is from west to east. But we must not forget that the peculiar disposition of the bottom of the two basins, which are bounded by two parallel chains, is a local phenomenon, altogether separate from the causes on which the general structure of the country depends. The eastern basin of the Cordillera of Venezuela is not shut up like the basin of Valencia. It is in the knot of the mountains of Las Coquizas and of Higuerota that the Serranía de los Teques and Oripoto, stretching eastward, form two valleys, those of the Rio Guaira and Rio Tuy. The former contains the town of Caracas, and both unite below the Caurimare. The Rio Tuy runs through the rest of the basin from west to east, as far as its mouth, which is situated on the north of the mountains of Panaquire. Cape Codera seems to terminate on the northern range of the littoral mountains of Venezuela, but this termination is only apparent. The coast forms a vast nook, 35 sea leagues in length, at the bottom of which is the mouth of the Rio Unare and the road of Nueva Barcelona. Stretching first from west to east in the parallel of 10 degrees 37 minutes, this coast recedes at the parallel of 10 degrees 6 minutes, and resumes its original direction 10 degrees 37 minutes to 10 degrees 44 minutes, from the western extremity of the peninsula of Araya to the eastern extremities of Montana de Paria and the island of Trinidad. From this dissection of the coast it follows that the range of mountains bordering the shore of the provinces of Caracas and Barcelona, between the meridian 66 degrees 32 minutes and 68 degrees 29 minutes, which I saw on the south of the Bay of Higuerota and on the north of the llanos of Pau and Cachipo, must be considered as the continuation of the southern chain of Venezuela, and as being linked on the west with the Sierras de Panaquire and Ucumare. It may therefore be said that between Cape Codera and Cariaco, the inland chain itself forms the coast. This range of very low mountains, often interrupted from the mouth of the Rio Tuy to that of the Rio Neveri, rises abruptly on the east of Nueva Barcelona, first in the rocky island of Chimanas, and then in the Cerro del Bergantin, elevated probably more than 800 toises, but of which the astronomical position and the precise height are yet alike unknown. On the meridian of Cumana, the northern chain, that of Cape Codera and the Silla of Caracas, again appears. The micaceous slate of the peninsula of Araya and Maniquarez joins by the ridge or knot of mountains of Miapire the southern chain, that of Panaquire, the Bergantin, Turimiquire, Caripe, and Guacharo. This ridge, not more than 200 toises of absolute height, has, in the ancient revolutions of our planet, prevented the eruption of the ocean and the union of the gulfs of Paria and Cariaco. On the west of Cape Codera, the northern chain, composed of primitive granitic rocks, presents the loftiest summits of the whole Cordillera of Venezuela, but the culminant points east of that cape are composed in the southern chain of secondary calcareous rocks. We have seen above that the peak of Turimiquiri at the back of Cocollar is 1,050 toises, while the bottoms of the high valleys of the convent of Caripe and of Guardia de San Agustin are 412 and 533 toises of absolute height. On the east of the ridge of Miapire, the southern chain sinks abruptly toward the Rio Arco and the Guarapiche, but on quitting the main land, we see it rising on the southern coast of the island of Trinidad, which is but a detached portion of the continent, and of which the northern side unquestionably presents the vestiges of the northern chain of Venezuela, that is, of the Montana de Paria, the paradise of Christopher Columbus, the peninsula of Araya, and the Silla of Caracas. The observations of latitude I made at the Villa de Cura, 10 degrees 2 minutes 47 seconds, the farm of Cocollar, 10 degrees 9 minutes 37 seconds, and the convent of Caripe, 10 degrees 10 minutes 14 seconds, compared with the more anciently known position of the south coast of Trinidad, latitude 10 degrees 6 minutes, prove that the southern chain, south of the basins of Valencia and of Tuy, and of the gulfs of Cariaco and Paria, is still more uniform in the direction from west to east than the northern chain from Corto Cabello to Punta Galera. Note: the bottom of the first of these four basins, bounded by parallel chains, is from 230 to 460 toises above, and that of the two latter from 30 to 40 toises below the present sea level. Hot springs gush from the bottom of the gulf of the basin of Cariaco, as far from the bottom of the base of Valencia on the continent. End of note. It is highly important to know the southern limit of the littoral Cordillera of Venezuela, because it determines the parallel at which the llanos, or the savannas of Caracas, Barcelona, and Cumana begin. On some well-known maps we find erroneously marked between the meridians of Caracas and Cumana 2 Cordilleras, stretching from north to south, as far as latitude 8 3/4 degrees, under the names of Cerros de Alta Gracia and del Bergantin, thus describing as mountainous a territory of 25 leagues broad, where we should seek in vain a hillock of a few feet in height. Turning to the island of Margarita, composed, like the peninsula of Araya, of micaceous slate, and anciently linked with that peninsula by the Morro de Chacopata and the islands of Coche and Cabagua, we seem to recognize in the two mountainous groups of Manacao and La Vega de San Juan traces of a third coast chain of the Cordillera of Venezuela. Do these two groups of Margarita, of which the most westerly is above 600 toises high, belong to a submarine chain stretching by the Isle of Tortuga toward the Sierra de Santa Lucia del Coro on the parallel of 11 degrees? Must we admit that in latitude 11 1/4 and 12 1/2 degrees, a fourth chain, the most northerly of all, formerly stretched out in the direction of the island of Hermanos by Blanquilla, Los Roques, Orchilla, Aves, Buen Aire, Curacao, and Oruba towards Cape Chichivacoa? These important problems can only be solved when the chain of islands parallel with the coast has been properly examined. It must not be forgotten that a great eruption of the ocean appears to have taken place between Trinidad and Grenada, and that nowhere else in the long series of the Lesser Antilles are two neighbouring islands so far removed from each other. Note. It is affirmed that the island of Trinidad is traversed in the northern part by a chain of primitive slate, and that Grenada furnishes basalt. It would be important to examine of what rock the island of Tobago is composed. It appeared to me of dazzling whiteness. And on what point, in going from Trinidad northward, the trachytic and trappean system of the Lesser Antilles begins. End of note. We observe the effect of the rotary current in the direction of the coast of Trinidad, as in the coasts of the provinces of Cumaná and Caracas, between Cape Paria and Punta Araya, and between Cape Codera and Porto Cabello. If a part of the continent has been overwhelmed by the ocean on the north of the peninsula of Araya, it is probable that the enormous shoal which surrounds Cubagua, Coche, the island of Margareta, Los Frailes, La Sola, and the Testigos, marks the extent and outline of the submerged land. This shoal or placer, which is of the extent of 200 square leagues, is well known only to the tribe of the Guayqueries. It is frequented by these Indians on account of its abundant fishery in calm weather. The Grand Placer is believed to be separated only by some canals or deep furrows of the bank of Grenada, from the sandbank that extends like a narrow dike from Tobago to Grenada, and which is known by the lowering of the temperature of the water, and from the sandbanks of Los Roques and Aves. The Guayqueri Indians, and, generally speaking, all the inhabitants of the coast of Cumaná and Barcelona, are imbued with an idea that the water of the shoals of Margarita and the Testigos diminishes from year to year. They believe that, in the lapse of ages, the Morro de Chacopata on the peninsula of Araya will be joined by a neck of land to the islands of Lobos and Coche. The partial retreat of the waters on the coast of Cumaná is undeniable, and the bottom of the sea has been upheaved at various times by earthquakes. But these local phenomena, which it is too difficult to account for by the action of volcanic force, the changes in the direction of currents, and the consequent swelling of the waters, are very different from the effects manifested at once over the space of several hundred square leagues. End of chapter 3.32, part 6. Chapter 3.32, part 7, of Personal Narrative of Travels to the Equinoctial Regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, Volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt. Translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.32, Part 7. 4. Group of the Mountains of Parima. It is essential to mineralogical geography to designate by one name all the mountains that form one system. To attain this end, a denomination belonging to a partial group only may be extended over the whole chain, or a name may be employed which, by reason of its novelty, is not likely to give rise to homogenic mistakes. Mountaineers designate every group by a special denomination, and a chain is generally considered as forming a whole only when it is seen from afar bounding the horizon of the plains. We find the name of snowy mountains, Himalaya, Emaus, repeated in every zone: white, Alps, Alb, black and blue. The greater part of the Sierra Parima is, as it were, edged round by the Orinoco. I have, however, avoided a denomination having reference to this circumstance, because the group of mountains to which I am about to direct attention extends far beyond the banks of the Orinoco. It stretches southeast towards the banks of the Rio Negro and the Rio Branco to the parallel of 1 1/2 degrees north latitude. The geographical name of Parima has the advantage of reviving recollections of the fable of El Dorado, and the lofty mountains which, in the 16th century, were supposed to surround the lake Rupunuwini, or the Laguna de Parima. The missionaries of the Orinoco still give the name of Parima to the whole of the vast mountainous country, comprehended between the sources of the Erevato, the Orinoco, the Caroni, the Rio Parima, a tributary of the Rio Branco, and the Rupunuri, or Rupunuwini, a tributary of the Rio Essequibo. Note: the Rio Parima, after receiving the waters of the Uraricuera, joins the Tacutu, and forms, near the fort of San Joaquim, the Rio Branco, one of the tributary streams of the Rio Negro. End of note. This country is one of the least known parts of South America, and is covered with thick forests and savannas. It is inhabited by independent Indians, and is intersected by rivers of dangerous navigation, owing to the frequency of shoals and cataracts. The system of the mountains of Parima separates the plains of the lower Orinoco from those of the Rio Negro and the Amazon. It occupies a territory of trapezoidal form, comprehended between the parallels of 3 and 8 degrees, and the meridians of 61 and 70½ degrees. I here indicate only the elements of the loftiest group, for we shall soon see that toward southeast, the mountainous country, in lowering, draws near the equator as well as to French and Portuguese Guiana. The Sierra Parima extends most in the direction north, 65 degrees west, and the partial chains into which it separates on the westward generally follow the same direction. It is less a cordillera or a continuous chain in the sense given to those denominations when applied to the Andes and Caucasus, than an irregular grouping of mountains, separated the one from the other by plains and savannas. I visited the northern, western, and southern parts of the Sierra Parima, which is remarkable by its position and its extent of more than 25,000 square leagues. From the confluence of the Apure as far as the delta of the Orinoco, it is uniformly 3 or 4 leagues removed from the right bank of the great river. Only some rocks of gneiss granite, amphibolic slate, and greenstone advance as far as the bed of the Orinoco, and create the rapids of Torno and of La Boca del Infierno. Note. To this series of advanced rocks also belong those which pierce the soil between the Rio Apure and the Rio Barima, the granitic and amphibolic rocks of the Vieja Guayana and of the town of Angostura, the Sierra de Mono on the southeast of Muitaco or Real Corona, the Cerro de Taramuto near Altagracia, etc. End of note. I shall name successively, from north-northeast to south-southwest, the different chains seen by M. Bonpland and myself, as we approach the equator and the river Amazon. First, the northernmost chain of the whole system of the mountains of Parima appeared to us to be that which stretches, latitude 7 degrees 50 minutes, from the Rio Arui, in the meridian of the rapids of Camiseta, at the back of the town of Angostura, towards the great cataracts of the Rio Caroni and the sources of the Imataca. In the missions of the Catalonian Capuchins, this chain, which is not 300 toises high, separates the tributary streams of the Orinoco and those of the Rio Cuyuni between the town of Upata, Capapui, and Santa Marta. Westward of the meridian of the rapids of Camiseta, longitude 67 degrees 10 minutes, the high mountains in the basin of the Rio Caura only commence at 7 degrees 20 minutes of latitude, on the south of the mission of San Luis Guaraguaraico, where they occasion the rapids of Mura. This chain stretches westward by the sources of the Rio Cuchivero, the Cerros del Mato, the Cerbatana, and Maniapure, as far as Tupapano, a group of strangely formed granite rocks surrounding the Encaramada. The culminant points of this chain, latitude 7 degrees 10 minutes to 7 degrees 28 minutes, are, according to the information I gathered from the Indians, situated near the sources of Cano de la Taturga. In the chain of the Encaramada there are some traces of gold. This chain is also celebrated in the mythology of the Tamanacs, for the painted rocks it contains are associated with ancient local traditions. The Orinoco changes its direction at the confluence of the Apure, breaking a part of the chain of the Encaramada. The latter mountains and scattered rocks in the plain of Capuchino and on the north of Cabruta may be considered either as the vestiges of a destroyed spur or, on the hypothesis of the igneous origin of granite, as partial eruptions and upheavals. I shall not here discuss the question whether the most northerly chain, that of Angostura, and of the Great Fall of Caroni, be a continuation of the chain of Encaramada. Third, in navigating the Orinoco from north to south, we observe alternately, on the east, small plains and chains of mountains of which we cannot distinguish the profiles, that is, the sections perpendicular to their longitudinal axes. From the mission of the Encaramada to the mouth of the Rio Cama, I counted 7 recurrences of this alternation of savannas and high mountains. First, on the south of the Isle Cucuruparu rises the chain of Chaviripe, latitude 7 degrees 10 minutes. It stretches, inclining toward the south, latitude 6 degrees 20 minutes to 6 degrees 40 minutes, by the Cerros de Corozal, the Amoco, and the Murcielago, as far as the Erevato, a tributary of the Caura. It there forms the rapids of Paru, and is linked with the summits of Matacuna. Fourth, the chain of Chaviripe is succeeded by that of the Baraguan, latitude 6 degrees 50 minutes to 7 degrees 5 minutes, celebrated for the strait of the Orinoco, to which it gives its name. The Saraguaca, or mountain of Uruana, composed of detached blocks of granites, may be regarded as a northern spur of the chain of the Baraguan, stretching southwest towards Siamacu, and the mountains, latitude 5 degrees 50 minutes, that separate the sources of the Erevato and the Caura from those of the Ventuari. Fifth, the chain of Carichana and of Paruasi, latitude 6 degrees 25 minutes, wild in aspect, but surrounded by charming meadows. Piles of granites crowned with trees and insulated rocks of prismatic form, the Mogoti of Coquiza, and the Mare Maruta or Castillito of the Jesuits belong to this chain. Sixth, on the western bank of the Orinoco, which is low and flat, the peak of Uniana rises abruptly more than 3,000 feet. The spurs, latitude 5 degrees 35 minutes to 5 degrees 40 minutes, which this peak sends eastward, are crossed by the Orinoco at the first great cataract, that of Mapura or the Atures. Further on they unite together, and rising in a chain stretch toward the sources of Cataniapo, the rapids of Ventuari, situated on the north of the confluence of the Assisi, latitude 5 degrees 10 minutes, and the Cerro Cunevo. Seventh, 5 leagues south of the Atures is the chain of Quituna, or of Maypures, latitude 15 degrees 13 minutes, which forms the bar of the second great cataract. None of those lofty mountains are situated on the west of the Orinoco. On the east of that river rises the Cunavami, the truncated peak of Calitamini, and the Huhamari, to which Father Gili attributes an extraordinary height. Eighth, the last chain of the southwest part of the Sierra Parima is separated by woody plains from the chain of the Maypures. It is the chain of the Cerros de Sipapo, latitude 4 degrees 50 minutes. An enormous wall behind which the powerful chief of the Guaypunabi Indians entrenched himself during the expedition of Solano. The chain of Sipapo may be considered as the beginning of the range of the lofty mountains which bound, at the distance of some leagues, the right bank of the Orinoco, where that river runs from southeast to northwest, between the mouth of the Ventuari, the Jao, and the Padamo, latitude 3 degrees 15 minutes. In ascending the Orinoco, above the cataract of Maypures, we find, long before we reach the point where it turns, near San Fernando del Atabapo, the mountains disappearing from the bed of the river, and from the mouth of the Zama there are only insulated rocks in the plains. The chain of Sipapo forms the southwest limit of the system of mountains of Parima, between 70 1/2 and 68 degrees of longitude. Modern geologists have observed that the culminant points of a group are less frequently found at its centre than toward one of its extremities, preceding and announcing in some sort a great depression of the chain. Note, as seen in Mont Blanc and Chimborazo. End of note. This phenomenon is again observed in the group of the Parima, the loftiest summits of which, the Duida and the Maraguaca, are in the most southerly range of mountains, where the plains of the Cassiquiare and the Rio Negro begin. These plains or savannas, which are covered with forests only in the vicinity of the rivers, do not, however, exhibit the same uniform continuity as the llanos of the lower Orinoco, of the Meta, and of Buenos Aires. They are interrupted by groups of hills, Cerros de Daribapa, and by insulated rocks of grotesque form, which pierce the soil and from a distance fix the attention of the traveller. These granitic and often stratified masses resemble the ruins of pillars or edifices. The same force which upheaved the whole group of the Sierra Parima has acted here and there in the plains as far as beyond the equator. The existence of these steeps and sporadic hills renders it difficult to determine the precise limits of a system in which the mountains are not longitudinally ranged as in a vein. As we advance toward the frontier of the Portuguese province of the Rio Negro, the high rocks become more rare, and we no longer find the shelves or dikes of gneiss granite, which cause rapids and cataracts in the rivers. Such is the surface of the soil, between 68 1/2 and 70 1/2 degrees of longitude, between the meridian of the bifurcation of the Orinoco and that of San Fernando de Atabapo. Further on, westward of the upper Rio Negro, toward the source of that river and its tributary streams, the Xi and the Uaupes, latitude 1 to 2 1/4 degrees, longitude 72 to 74 degrees, lies a small mountainous tableland in which Indian traditions place a Laguna de Oro, that is, a lake surrounded with beds of auriferous earth. Note. According to the journals of Acunha and Fritz, the Manao Indians, Manoas, obtained from the banks of the Iguiare or Iguare, gold of which they made thin plates. The manuscript notes of Don Apolinaro also mention the gold of the Rio Uaupes. La Condamine Voyage à l'Amazon. We must not confound the Laguna de Oro, which is said to be found in going up the Uaupes, north latitude 0 degrees 40 minutes, with another gold lake, south latitude 1 degree 10 minutes, which La Condamine calls Marahi, or Morachi, water, and which is merely a tract often inundated between the sources of the Jurubesh, Urubahi, and the Rio Marahi, a tributary stream of the Caqueta. End of note. At Maroa, the most westerly mission of the Rio Negro, the Indians assured me that that river, as well as the Inirida, a tributary of the Guaviare, rises at the distance of 5 days' march in a country bristled with rocks and hills. The natives of San Marcelino speak of a Sierra Tuhuni, nearly 30 leagues west of their village, between the Hi and the Icana. La Condamine learned also from the Indians of the Amazon that the Quiquiari comes from a country of mountains and mines. Now, the Iquiari is placed by the French astronomer between the equator and the mouth of the Hi, Ihi, which identifies it with the Iguiari that falls into the Icana. We cannot advance in the geological knowledge of America without having continually recourse to the researches of comparative geography. The small system of mountains, which we may provisionally call that of the sources of the Rio Negro and the Uaupes, and the culminant points of which are not probably more than 100 or 120 toises high, appears to extend southward to the basin of Rio Yupuru, where rocky ridges form the cataracts of the Rio de los Iganos and the Salto Grande de Upura, south latitude 0 degrees 40 minutes to north latitude 0 degrees 28 minutes, and the basin of the Upper Guaviare towards the west. We find in the course of this river, from 60 to 70 leagues west of San Fernando del Atabapo, 2 walls of rocks bounding the strait, nearly 3 degrees 10 minutes north latitude and 73 3/4 degrees longitude, where Father Maella terminated his excursion. That missionary told me that, in going up the Guaviare, he perceived near the strait, Angostura, a chain of mountains bounding the horizon on the south. It is not known whether those mountains traverse the Guaviare more to the west and join the spurs which advance from the eastern Cordillera of New Granada, between the Rio Umadilla and the Rio Ariari, in the direction of the savannas of San Juan de los Llanos. I doubt the existence of this junction. If it really existed, the plains of the lower Orinoco would communicate with those of the Amazon only by a very narrow land strait on the east of the mountainous country which surrounds the source of the Rio Negro. But it is more probable that this mountainous country, a small system of mountains geognostically dependent on the Sierra Parima, forms as it were an island in the Llanos of Guaviare and Upura. Father Punier, principal of the Franciscan convent at Popayan, assured me that when he went from the missions settled on the Rio Caguan to Aramo, a village situated on the Rio Guayavero, he found only treeless savannas extending as far as the eye could reach. The chain of mountains placed by several modern geographers between the Meta and the Vichada, and which appears to link the Andes of New Granada with the Sierra Parima, is altogether imaginary. We have now examined the prolongation of the Sierra Parima on the west toward the source of the Rio Negro. It remains for us to follow the same group in its eastern direction. The mountains of the upper Orinoco, eastward of the Raudal of the Guajaribos, north latitude 1 degree 15 minutes, longitude 67 degrees 38 minutes, join the chain of Pacaraina, which divides the waters of the Caroni and the Rio Branco, and of which the micaceous schist, resplendent with silvery luster, figures so conspicuously in Raleigh's El Dorado. The part of that chain containing the sources of the Orinoco has not yet been explored, but its prolongation more to the east, between the meridian of the military post of Guirior and the Rupunuri, a tributary of the Essequibo, is known to me through the travels of the Spaniards Antonio Santos and Nicolas Rodriguez, and also by the geodesic labours of 2 Portuguese, Pontes and Almeida. 2 portages but little frequented are situated between the Rio Branco and the Rio Essequibo, south of the chain of Pacaraina. They shorten the land road leading from the Via del Rio Negro to Dutch Guiana. Note: the portages of Sarauru and the Lake Amucu. End of note. On the contrary, the portage between the basin of the Rio Branco and that of the Caroni crosses the summit of the chain of Pacaraina. On the northern slope of this chain rises the Anocapra, a tributary of the Paraguamusi or Paravamusi. and on the southern slope the Ara-Iquique, which, with the Urari-Capara, forms the famous Valley of Inundations, above the destroyed mission of Santa Rosa, latitude 3 degrees 46 minutes, longitude 65 degrees 10 minutes. The principal Cordillera, which appears of little breadth, stretches on a length of 80 leagues, from the portage of Anocapra, longitude 65 degrees 35 minutes, to the left bank of the Rupunuri, longitude 61 degrees 50 minutes, following the parallels of 4 degrees 4 minutes and 4 degrees 12 minutes. We there distinguish from west to east the mountains of Pacaraina, Tipique, Taullana, among which rises the Rio Parima, a tributary of the Urariquera, Tubachi, Cristo, latitude 3 degrees 56 minutes, longitude 62 degrees 52 minutes, and Canopiri. The Spanish traveller Rodriguez marks the eastern part of the chain by the name of Quimiropaca, but preferring to adopt general names, I continue to give the name of Pacaraina to the whole of this Cordillera, which links the mountains of the Orinoco to the interior of Dutch and French Guiana, and which Raleigh and Keymis made known in Europe at the end of the 16th century. This chain is broken by the Rupunuri and the Essequibo, so that one of their tributary streams, the Tavaricuru, takes its rise on the southern declivity, and the other, the Cibarona, on the northern. On approaching the Essequibo, the mountains are more developed toward the southeast, and extend beyond 2.5 degrees north latitude. From this eastern branch of the chain of Pacaraina, the Rio Rupunuri rises near the Cerro Uassari. On the right bank of the Rio Branco, in a still more southern latitude, between 1 and 2 degrees north, is a mountainous territory in which the Caritamini, the Padaviri, the Cababuri, Cavaburis, and the Pacamoni take their source, from east to west. This western branch of the mountains of Pacaraina separates the basin of Rio Branco from that of the upper Orinoco, the sources of which are probably not found east of the meridian of 66 degrees 15 minutes. It is linked with the mountains of Unturan and Yumariquin, situated southeast of the mission of Esmeralda. Thence it results that while on the west of the Cassiquiare, between that river, the Atabapo, and the Rio Negro, we find only vast plains, in which rise some little hills and insulated rocks, real spurs stretched eastward of the Cassiquiare, from northwest to southeast, and form a continued mountainous territory as far as 2 degrees north latitude. The basin only, or rather the transversal valley of the Rio Branco, forms a kind of gulf, a succession of plains and savannas, campos, several of which penetrate from south to north, into the mountainous land between the eastern and western branches of the chain of Pacaraina, to the distance of 8 leagues north of the parallel of San Joaquin. End of chapter 3.32, part 7. Chapter 3.32, part 8, of Personal Narrative of Travels to the Equinoctial Regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, Volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt, translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.32, Part 8. We have just examined the southern part of the vast system of the mountains of Parima, between 2 and 4 degrees of latitude, and between the meridians of the sources of the Orinoco and the Essequibo. The development of this system of mountains northward, between the chain of Pacaraina and the Rio Cuyuni, and between the meridians 66 and 61.75 degrees, is still less known. The only road frequented by white men is that of the river Paragua, which receives the Paraguamusi near the Guirior. We find indeed in the journal of Nicolas Rodriguez that he was constantly obliged to have his canoe carried by men, arrastrando, past the cataracts which intercept the navigation. But we must not forget a circumstance of which my own experience furnished me with frequent proofs, that the cataracts in this part of South America are often caused only by ridges of rocks which do not form mountains. Rodriguez names but 2 between Barceloneta and the mission of San Jose, while the missionaries place more to the east, in 6 degrees latitude, between the Rio Caroni and the Cuyuni, the Serranias of Usupama and Rinocote. The latter crosses the Mazaruni and forms 39 cataracts in the Essequibo, from the military post of Arenda, latitude 5 degrees 30 minutes, to the mouth of Rupunuri. With respect to the continuation of the system of the mountains of Parima, southeast of the meridian of the Essequibo, the materials are entirely wanting for tracing it with precision. The whole interior of Dutch, French, and Portuguese Guiana is a terra incognita, and the astronomical geography of those countries has scarcely made any progress during the space of 30 years. If the American limits recently fixed between France and Portugal should one day cease to be mere diplomatic illusions and acquire reality in being traced on the territory by means of astronomical observations, as was projected in 1817, this undertaking would lead geographical engineers to that unknown region which, at 3.5 degrees west of Cayenne, divides the waters between the coast of Guyana and the Amazon. Till that period, which the political state of Brazil seems to retard, the geognostic table of the group of Parima can only be completed by scattered notions collected in the Portuguese and Dutch colonies. In going from the Uassari Mountains, latitude 2 degrees 25 minutes, longitude 61 degrees 50 minutes, which form a part of the eastern branch of the Cordillera of Pacaraina, we find towards the east a chain of mountains, called by the missionaries Acaré and Tumucuraque. Those two names are found on our maps between 1/2 and 3 degrees north latitude. Raleigh first made known, in 1596, the system of the mountains of Parima, between the sources of the Rio Caroni and the Essequibo, by the name of Guacarima, Pacarima, and the Jesuits Acunha and Artadilla furnished, in 1639, the first precise notions of that part of this system which extends from the meridian of Essequibo to that of Oyapoc. There they place the mountains of Iguaracura and Paraguajo, the former of which gives birth to a gold river, Rio de Oro, a tributary of the Curupatuba. Note: when we know that in Tamanac gold is called caricuri, in Carib caricura, in Peruvian curi, we easily recognize in the names of the mountains and rivers Iguacuri, Curupatuba, which we have just marked, the indication of auriferous soil. Such is the analogy of the imported roots in the American tongues, which otherwise differ altogether from each other, that 300 leagues west of the mountain Igaracuru, on the banks of the Caqueta, Pedro de Usura heard of the province of Caricuri, rich in gold washings. The Curupatuba falls into the Amazon near the villa of Monte Alegre, northeast of the mouth of the Rio Tapoyos. End of note. And according to the assertion of the natives, subterraneous noises are sometimes heard from the latter. The ridge of this chain of mountains, which runs in a direction south 85 degrees east, from the peak of Duida near the Esmeralda, latitude 3 degrees 19 minutes, to the rapids of the Rio Manaya near Cape Nord, latitude 1 degree 50 minutes, divides in the parallel of 2 degrees the northern sources of the Essequibo, the Maroni, and the Oyapoc, from the southern sources of the Rio Trombetas, Curupatuba, and Paru. The most southern spurs of this chain approach nearer to the Amazon at the distance of 15 leagues. These are the first heights which we perceive after having left Riberos and the mouth of the Huallaga. They are constantly seen in navigating from the mouth of the Rio Topayo towards that of Paru, from the town of Santarem to Almerim. The peak Tripopo is nearly in the meridian of the former of those towns, and is celebrated among the Indians of the Upper Maroni. It is said that farther eastward, at Melgaco, the Sierras do Velho and do Paru are still distinguished in the horizon. The real boundaries of this series of sources of the Rio Trombetas are better known southward than northward, where a mountainous country appears to advance in Dutch and French Guiana as far as within 20 to 25 leagues of the coast. The numerous cataracts of the rivers of Suriname, Maroni, and Oyapoc prove the extent and the prolongation of rocky ridges, but in those regions nothing indicates the existence of continued plains or tablelands some 100 toises high, fitted for the cultivation of the plants of the temperate zone. The system of the mountains of Parima surpasses in extent 19 times that of the whole of Switzerland. Even considering the mountainous group of the sources of the Rio Negro and the Xi as independent or insulated amid the plains, we still find the Sierra Parima, between Maypures and the sources of the Oyapoc, to be 340 leagues in length. Its greatest breadth, the rocks of Imataca, near the delta of the Orinoco, at the sources of the Rio Paru, is 140 leagues. In the group of the Parima, as well as in the group of the mountains of Central Asia, between the Himalaya and the Altai, The partial chains are often interrupted and have no uniform parallelism. Towards the southwest, however, between the Strait of Baraguan, the mouth of the Rio Zama, and the Esmeralda, the line of the mountains is generally in the direction of north 70 degrees west. Such is also the position of a distant coast, that of Portuguese, French, Dutch, and English Guiana, from Cape North to the mouth of the Orinoco. Such is the mean direction of the course of the Rio Negro and Upura. It is desirable to fix our attention on the angles formed by the partial chains in different regions of America with the meridians, because on less extended surfaces, for instance in Germany, we find also this singular coexistence of groups of neighbouring mountains, following laws of direction altogether different, though every separate group exhibits the greatest uniformity in the line of chains. The soil on which the mountains of Parima rise is slightly convex. By barometric measures I found that, between 3 and 4 degrees north latitude, the plains are elevated from 160 to 180 toises above sea level. This height will appear considerable if we reflect that at the foot of the Andes of Peru at Tomependa, 900 leagues from the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, the llanos or plains of the Amazon rise only to the height of 194 toises. The distinctive characteristics of the group of the mountains of Parima are the rocks of granite and granite gneiss, the total absence of calcareous secondary formations, and the shelves of bare rock, the tsi of the Chinese deserts, which occupy immense spaces in the savannas. 5. Group of the Brazil Mountains. This group has hitherto been marked on the maps in a very erroneous way. The temperate tablelands and real chains of 300 to 500 toises high have been confounded with countries of exceedingly hot temperature, and of which the undulating surface presents only ranges of hills variously grouped. But the observations of scientific travellers have recently thrown great light on the orography of Portuguese America. The mountainous region of Brazil, of which the mean height rises at least to 400 toises, is comprehended within very narrow limits, nearly between 18 and 28 degrees south latitude. It does not appear to extend between the provinces of Goiás and Mato Grosso, between longitude 53 degrees west of the meridian of Paris. When we regard in one view the eastern configuration of North and South America, we perceive that the coast of Brazil and Guyana, from Cape Saint Roque to the mouth of the Orinoco, stretching from southeast to northwest, corresponds with that of Labrador, as the coast from Cape Saint Roque to the Rio de la Plata corresponds with that of the United States, stretching from southwest to northeast. The chain of the Alleghenies is opposite to the latter coast, as the principal cordilleras of Brazil are nearly parallel to the shore of the provinces of Porto Seguro, Rio Janeiro, and Rio Grande. The Alleghenies, generally composed of grauwacke and transition rocks, are somewhat loftier than the almost primitive mountains of granite, gneiss, and mica slate of the Brazilian group. They are also of a far more simple structure, their chains lying nearer to each other and preserving, as in the Jura, a more uniform parallelism. If, instead of comparing those parts of the new continent situated north and south of the equator, we confine ourselves to South America, we find on the western and northern coasts in their whole length a continued chain near the shore, the Andes and the Cordillera of Venezuela, while the eastern coast presents masses of more or less lofty mountains only between 12 and 30 degrees south latitude. In this space, 360 leagues in length, the system of the Brazil Mountains corresponds geologically in form and position with the Andes of Chile and Peru. Its most considerable portion lies between the parallels 15 and 22 degrees, opposite the Andes of Potosi and La Paz, but its mean height is 5 toises less, and cannot even be compared with that of the mountains of Parima, Jura, and Auvergne. The principal direction of the Brazilian chains, where they attain the height of from 4 to 500 toises, is from south to north, and from south-southwest to north-northeast, but between 13 and 19 degrees the chains are considerably enlarged, and at the same time lowered toward the west. Ridges and ranges of hills seem to advance beyond the land straits, which separate the sources of the Rio Araguay, Parana, Topayos, Paraguay, Guapore, and Aguapehy, in 63 degrees longitude. As the western widening of the Brazilian group, or rather the undulations of the soil in the Campos Parecis, correspond with the spurs of Santa Cruz de la Sierra and Beni, which the Andes send out eastward, It was formerly concluded that the system of the mountains of Brazil was linked with that of the Andes of Upper Peru. I myself laboured under this error in my first geological studies. A coast chain, Cerro do Mar, runs nearly parallel with the coast, northeast of Rio Janeiro, lowering considerably towards Rio Doce, and losing itself almost entirely near Bahia, latitude 12 degrees 58 minutes. According to M. Eschwege, some small ridges near Cape Saint-Roch, latitude 5 degrees 12 minutes. Note: Diagnostica Gemude von Brasilien, 1822. The limestone of Bahia abounds in fossil wood. End of note. Southeast of Rio de Janeiro, and the Cerro Maro follows the coast behind the island of St. Catherine as far as Torres, latitude 29 degrees 20 minutes. It there turns westward and forms an elbow stretching by the Campos de Vacaria towards the banks of the Jacuí. Another chain is situated westward of the shore chain of Brazil. This is the most lofty and considerable of all, and is called the chain of Villarrica. M. Eschwege distinguishes it by the name of Cerro do Espinhaco, and considers it as the principal part of the whole structure of the mountains of Brazil. This Cordillera loses itself northward, between Minas Novas and the southern extremity of the Capitania of Bahia in 16 degrees latitude. Note: the rocky ridges that form the cataract of Paulo Afonso in the Rio San Francisco are supposed to belong to the northern prolongation of the Cerro de Espinaco, as a series of heights in the province of Ceará, fetid calcareous rocks containing a quantity of petrified fish, belong to the Cerros dos Vertentes. End of note. It is there more than 60 leagues removed from the coast of Porto Seguro, but southward, between the parallels of Rio Janeiro and St. Paul, latitude 22 to 23 degrees, in the knot of the mountains of Serra da Mantiqueira, it draws so near to the Cordillera of the shore, Cerro do Mar, that they are almost confounded together. In the same manner, the Cerro do Espinhaco follows constantly the direction of a meridian towards the north, while towards the south it runs southeast and terminates about 25 degrees latitude. The chain reaches its highest elevation between 18 and 21 degrees, and there the spurs and tablelands at its back are of sufficient extent to furnish lands for cultivation where, at successive heights, there are temperate climates comparable to the delicious climates of Jalapa, Guaduas, Caracas, and Caripe. This advantage, which depends at once on the widening of the mass of the chain and of its spurs, is nowhere found in the same degree east of the Andes, not even in chains of more considerable absolute height, as those of Venezuela and the Orinoco. The culminant points of the Serra do Espinhaco in the Capitania of Minas Gerais are the Itambe, 932 toises, the Cerro de Piedad, near Sabara, 910 toises, the Itacalumi, properly Itacunumi, 900 toises, the Pico of Itibiri, 816 toises, the Serras of Caraca, Ibitipoca, and Papagayo. Saint Hilaire felt piercing cold in the month of November, therefore in summer, in the whole Cordillera of Lapa, from the Villa do Principe to the Morro of Gaspar Suarez. We have just noticed two chains of mountains, nearly parallel, but of which the most extensive, the littoral chain, is the least lofty. The capital of Brazil is situated at the point where the two chains draw nearest together, and are linked together on the east of the Serra de Mantiqueira, if not by a transversal ridge, at least by a mountainous territory. Old systematic ideas respecting the rising of mountains in proportion as we advance into a country would have warranted the belief that there existed, in the Capitanio of Mato Grosso, a central cordillera much loftier than that of Villarrica or do Espinhaco, but we now know, and this is confirmed by climateric circumstances, that there exists no continued chain, properly speaking, westward of Rio San Francisco, on the frontiers of Minas Gerais and Goiás. We find only a group of mountains, of which the culminant points are the Serras de Canastra, southwest of Paracatu, and the de Marseille, latitude 8 1/2 and 9.10 degrees, and further north the Pyrenees stretching from east to west, latitude 16 degrees 10 minutes, between Villaboa and Meja Ponte. M. Eschwege has named the group of mountains of Goiás the Serra dos Vertentes, because it divides the waters between the southern tributary streams of the Rio Grande or Parana and the northern tributary streams of Rio Tocantins. It runs southward beyond the Rio Grande, Parana, and approaches the chain of Espinpapo in 23 degrees latitude by the Serra do Franca. It attains only the height of 300 or 400 toises, with the exception of some summits northwest of Paracatu, and is consequently much lower than the chain of Villarica. Further on, west of the meridian of Villaboa, there are only ridges and a series of low hills which, on a length of 12 degrees, form the division of water, latitude 13 to 17 degrees, between the Araguay and the Paranaíba, a tributary of the Parana, between the Rio Tapoyos and the Paraguay, between Guapure and the Aguapehi. The Serra of San Marta, longitude 15 1/2 degrees, is somewhat lofty, but maps have vastly exaggerated the height of the Cerros or Campos Paracis, north of the towns of Quibaya and Villabella, latitude 13 to 14 degrees, and longitude 58 to 62 degrees. These campos, which take their name from that of a tribe of wild Indians, are vast, barren tablelands, entirely destitute of vegetation, and in them the sources of the tributary streams of three great rivers, the Topayos, the Madeira, and the Paraguay, take their rise. According to the measures and geologic observations of M. Eschwege, the high summits of the Cerro do Mar, the coast chain, scarcely attain 660 toises. Those of the Cerro do Espinhaco, chain of Villarica, 950 toises. Those of Serra de los Vertentes, group of Canastra, and the Brazilian Pyrenees, 450 toises. Further west, the surface of the soil seems to present but slight undulations, but no measure of height has been made beyond the meridian of Villaboa. Considering the system of the mountains of Brazil in their real limits, we find, except some conglomerates, the same absence of secondary formations as in the system of the mountains of the Orinoco, group of Parima. These secondary formations, which rise to considerable heights in the Cordillera of Venezuela and Cumana, belong only to the low regions of Brazil. End of chapter 3.32, part 8. Chapter 3.32, Part 9, of Personal Narrative of Travels to the Equinoctial Regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, Volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt, translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.32, Part 9. B. Plains, llanos, or basins. In that part of South America, situated on the east of the Andes, we have successively examined three systems of mountains, those of the shore of Venezuela, of the Parima, and Brazil. We have seen that this mountainous region, which equals the Cordillera of the Andes, not in mass, but in area and horizontal section of the surface, is 3 times less elevated, much less rich in precious metals adhering to the rock, destitute of recent traces of volcanic fire, and, with the exception of the coast of Venezuela, little exposed to the violence of earthquakes. The average height of the three systems diminishes from north to south, from 750 to 400 toises. Those of the culminant points, maxima of the height of each group, from 1350 to 1000 or 900 toises. Hence it results that the loftiest chain, with the exception of the small insulated system of the Sierra Nevada of Santa Marta, is the Cordillera of the shore of Venezuela, which is itself but a continuation of the Andes. Directing our attention northward, we find in Central America, latitude 12 to 30 degrees, and North America, latitude 30 to 70 degrees, on the east of the Andes of Guatemala, Mexico, and Upper Louisiana, the same regular lowering which struck us towards the south. In this vast extent of land, from the Cordillera of Venezuela to the Polar Circle, Eastern America presents 2 distinct systems: the group of the mountains of the West Indies, which in its eastern part is volcanic, and the chain of the Alleghenies. The former of these systems, partly covered by the ocean, may be compared, with respect to its relative position and form, to the Sierra Parima, the latter to the Brazil chains, running also from southwest to northeast. The culminant points of those 2 systems rise to 1,138 and 1,040 toises. Such are the elements of this curve, of which the convex summit is in the littoral chain of Venezuela. America east of the Andes. Column 1, Systems of Mountains. Column 2, Maxima of Heights in toises. Brazil group, Iticolumi, 900, south latitude 20 1/2 degrees. Parima group, Duida, 1300, north latitude 3 1/4 degrees. Littoral chain of Venezuela, Silla of Caracas, 1,350, north latitude 10 1/2 degrees. Group of the West Indies, Blue Mountains, 1,138, north latitude 18 1/5 degrees. Chain of the Alleghanies, Mount Washington, 1,040, north latitude 44 1/4 degrees. I have preferred indicating in this table the culminant points of each system to the mean height of the line of elevation. The culminant points are the result of direct measures, while the mean height is an abstract idea somewhat vague, particularly when there is only one group of mountains, as in Brazil, Parima, and the West Indies, and not a continued chain. Although it cannot be doubted that, among the 5 systems of mountains on the east of the Andes, of which only one belongs to the southern hemisphere, the littoral chain of Venezuela is the most elevated, having a culminant point of 1,350 toises, and a mean height from the line of elevation of 750. We yet recognize with surprise that the mountains of eastern America, whether continental or insular, differ very considerably in their height above the level of the sea. The 5 groups are all nearly of an average height of from 500 to 700 toises, and the culminant points, maxima of the lines of elevation, from 1,000 to 1,300 toises. That uniformity of structure, in an extent twice as great as Europe, appears to me a very remarkable phenomenon. No summit east of the Andes of Peru, Mexico, and Upper Louisiana rises beyond the limit of perpetual snow. Note: not even the White Mountains of the state of New Hampshire, to which Mount Washington belongs. Long before the accurate measurement of Captain Partridge, I had proved, in 1804, by the laws of decrement of heat, that no summit of the White Mountains could attain the height assigned to them by Mr. Cutler of 1,600 toises. End of note. It may be added that, with the exception of the Alleghanies, no snow falls sporadically in any of the eastern systems which we have just examined. From these considerations it results, and above all, from the comparison of the new continent with those parts of the old world which we know best, with Europe and Asia, that America, thrown into the aquatic hemisphere of our planet, is still more remarkable for the continuity and extent of the depression of its surface than for the height and continuity of its longitudinal ridge. Beyond and within the Isthmus of Panama, but eastward of the Cordillera of the Andes, the mountains scarcely attain, over an extent of 600,000 square leagues, the height of the Scandinavian Alps, the Carpathians, the Mont d'Or in Auvergne, and the Jura. Note: the southern hemisphere, owing to the unequal distribution of seas and continents, has long been marked as eminently aquatic, but the same inequality is found when we consider the globe as divided not according to the equator, but by meridians. The great masses of land are stinted between the meridian of 10 degrees west and 150 degrees east of Paris, while the hemisphere eminently aquatic begins westward of the meridian of the coast of Greenland, and ends on the east of the meridian of the eastern coast of New Holland and the Kurile Isles. This unequal distribution of land and water has the greatest influence on the distribution of heat over the surface of the globe, on the inflections of the isothermal lines, and the climateric phenomena in general. For the inhabitants of the central parts of Europe, the aquatic hemisphere may be called western, and the land hemisphere eastern, because in going to the west we reach the former sooner than the latter. It is the division according to the meridians, which is intended in the text. Till at the end of the 15th century, the western hemisphere was as much unknown to the nations of the eastern hemisphere as the 1/2 of the lunar globe is to us at present, and will probably always remain. End of note. One system only, that of the Andes, comprises in America, over a long and narrow zone of 3,000 leagues, all the summits exceeding 1,400 toises high. In Europe, on the contrary, even considering the Alps and the Pyrenees as one sole line of elevation, we still find summits far from this line or principal ridge, in the Sierra Nevada of Granada, Sicily, Greece, the Apennines, perhaps also in Portugal, from 1,500 to 1,800 toises high. Note: culminant points: Malhazen of Granada, 1,826 toises; Etna, according to Captain William Henry Smith, 1,700 toises; Monte Corno of the Apennines, 1,489 toises. If Mount Tomoros in Greece and the Serra Gaviara of Portugal enter, as is alleged, into the limit of perpetual snow, those summits, according to their position and latitude, should attain from 1400 to 1600 toises. Yet on the loftiest mountains of Greece, Tomoros, Olympus in Thessaly, Polyanos in Dolope, and Mount Parnassus, M. Pocqueville saw, in the month of August, snow lying only in patches, and in cavities sheltered from the rays of the sun. End of note. The contrast between America and Europe with respect to distribution of the culminant points, which attain from 1300 to 1500 toises, is the more striking as the low eastern mountains of South America, of which the maximum of elevation is only from 1300 to 1400 toises, are situated beside a cordillera of which the mean height exceeds 1800 toises, while the secondary system of the mountains of Europe rises to a maxima of elevation of 1500 to 1800 toises, near a principal chain of at least 1200 toises of average height. Maxima of the line of elevation in the same parallels. Andes of Chile, Upper Peru, knots of the mountains of Porco and Cusco, 2500 toises, group of the Brazil Mountains, a little lower than the Cevennes, 900 to 1000 toises. Andes of Popayan and Cundinamarca, chain of Guacas, Quindiu, and Antioquia, more than 2,800 toises. Group of Parima Mountains, little lower than the Carpathians, 1,300 toises. Insulated group of the snowy mountains of Santa Marta. It is believed to be 3,000 toises high. Littoral chain of Venezuela, 80 toises lower than the Scandinavian Alps, 1,350 toises. Volcanic Andes of Guatemala and primitive Andes of Oaxaca, from 1,700 to 1,800 toises. Group of the West Indies, 170 toises higher than the mountains of Auvergne, 1,140 toises. Andes of New Mexico and Upper Louisiana, Rocky Mountains, and further west, the Maritime Alps of New Albion, 1,600 to 1,900 toises. Chain of the Alleghenies, 160 toises higher than the chains of Jura and the Gates of Malabar, 1,040 toises. This table contains the whole system of mountains of the new continent, namely the Andes, the Maritime Alps of California, or New Albion, and the 5 groups of the East. I may subjoin to the facts I have just stated an observation equally striking. In Europe, the maxima of secondary systems, which exceed 1,500 toises, are found solely on the south of the Alps and Pyrenees, that is, on the south of the principal continental ridge. They are situated on the side where that ridge approaches nearest the shore, and where the Mediterranean has not overwhelmed the land. On the north of the Alps and Pyrenees, on the contrary, the most elevated secondary systems, the Carpathian and the Scandinavian mountains, do not attain the height of 1,300 toises. Note: the Lomnitzer Spitz of the Carpathian is, according to M. Wallenberg, 1,245 toises. Snehatten, in the chain of Dovrefjeld in Norway, the highest summit of the old continent north of the parallel of 55 degrees, is 1,270. End of note. The depression of the line of elevation of the second order is consequently found in Europe, as well as in America, where the principal ridge is farthest removed from the shore. If we did not fear to subject great phenomena to too small a scale, we might compare the difference of the height of the Alps and the mountains of eastern America with the difference of height observable between the Alps or the Pyrenees and the Mont d'Or, the Jura, the Vosges, or the Black Forest. We have just seen that the causes which upheaved the oxidated crust of the globe in ridges, or in groups of mountains, have not acted very powerfully in the vast extent of country stretching from the eastern part of the Andes towards the Old World. That depression and that continuity of plains are geological facts, the more remarkable as they extend nowhere else in other latitudes. The 5 mountain systems of eastern America, of which we have stated the limits, divide that part of the continent into an equal number of basins, of which only that of the Caribbean Sea remains submerged. From north to south, from the polar circle to the Straits of Magellan, we see in succession 1. The basin of the Mississippi and of Canada. An able geologist, Mr. Edwin James, has recently shown that this basin is comprehended between the Andes of New Mexico, or Upper Louisiana, and the chains of the Alleghenies, which stretch northward in crossing the rapids of Quebec. It being quite as open northward as southward, it may be designated by the collective name of the basin of the Mississippi, the Missouri, the River St. Lawrence, the Great Lakes of Canada, the Mackenzie River, the Saskatchewan, and the coast of Hudson's Bay. The tributary streams of the lakes and those of the Mississippi are not separated by a chain of mountains running from east to west, as traced on several maps. The line of partition of the waters is marked by a slight ridge, a rising of 2 counterslopes in the plain. There is no chain between the sources of the Missouri and the Assiniboine, which is a branch of the Red River, and of Hudson's Bay. The surface of these plains, almost all savanna, between the Polar Sea and the Gulf of Mexico, is more than 270,000 square sea leagues, nearly equal to the area of the whole of Europe. On the north of the parallel of 42 degrees, the general slope of the land runs eastward. On the south of that parallel, it inclines southward. To form a precise idea how little abrupt are these slopes, we must recollect that the land of Lake Superior is 100 toises, that of Lake Erie 88 toises, and that of Lake Ontario 36 toises above the level of the sea. The plains around Cincinnati, latitude 39 degrees 6 minutes, are scarcely, according to Mr. Drake, 80 toises of absolute height. Towards the west, between the Ozark Mountains and the foot of the Andes of Upper Louisiana, Rocky Mountains, latitude 35 to 38 degrees, the basin of the Mississippi is considerably elevated in the vast desert described by Mr. Nuttall. It presents a series of small tablelands, gradually rising one above another, and of which the most westerly, that nearest the Rocky Mountains between the Arkansas and the Paducah, is more than 450 toises high. Major Long measured a base to determine the position and height of James Peak. In the Great Basin of the Mississippi, the line that separates the forests and the savannas runs, not as may be supposed, in the manner of a parallel, but like the Atlantic coast and the Allegheny Mountains themselves, from northeast to southwest, from Pittsburgh toward St. Louis and the Red River of Natchitoches, so that the northern part only of the state of Illinois is covered with gramina. This line of demarcation is not only interesting for the geography of plants, but exerts, as we have said above, great influence in retarding culture and population northwest of the lower Mississippi. In the United States, the prairie countries are more slowly colonized, and even the tribes of independent Indians are forced by the rigor of the climate to pass the winter on the banks of rivers where poplars and willows are found. The basins of the Mississippi, of the Lakes of Canada, and the St. Lawrence are the largest in America, and though the total population does not rise at present beyond 3 millions, it may be considered as that in which, between latitude 29 and 45 degrees, longitude 74 to 94 degrees, civilization has made the greatest progress. It may even be said that in the other basins, of the Orinoco, the Amazon, and Buenos Aires, agricultural life scarcely exists. It begins, on a small number of points only, to supersede pastoral life and that of fishing and hunting nations. The plains between the Alleghenies and the Andes of Upper Louisiana are of such vast extent that, like the pampas of Chocos and Buenos Aires, bamboos, Ludofia miega, and palm trees grow at one extremity, while the other, during a great part of the year, is covered with ice and snow. This is a continuation of the basin of the Mississippi, Louisiana, and Hudson's Bay. It may be said that all the lowlands on the coast of Venezuela, situated north of the littoral chain and of the Sierra Nevada de Merida, belong to the submerged part of this basin. If I treat here separately of the basin of the Caribbean Sea, it is to avoid confounding what, in the present state of the globe, is partly above and partly below the ocean. The recent coincidence of the periods of earthquakes observed at Caracas and on the banks of the Mississippi, the Arkansas, and the Ohio, justifies the geologic theories which regard as one basin the plains bounded on the south by the littoral Cordillera of Venezuela, on the east by the Alleghenies and the series of the volcanoes of the West Indies, and on the west by the Rocky Mountains, Mexican Andes, and by the series of the volcanoes of Guatemala. The basin of the West Indies forms, as we have already observed, a Mediterranean with several issues, the influence of which on the political destinies of the new continent depends at once on its central position and the great fertility of its islands. The outlets of the basin, of which the 4 largest are 70 miles broad, are all on the eastern side, open towards Europe, and agitated by the currents of the tropics. Note: between Tobago and Grenada, St. Martin and the Virgin Isles, Puerto Rico and St. Domingo, and between the Little Bank of Bahama and Cape Canaveral of Florida. End of note. In the same manner as we recognize in our Mediterranean the vestiges of 3 ancient basins by the proximity of roads, Scarpanto, Candia, and Cerigo, as well as by that of Cape Solero of Sicily, the island of Pantelleria, and Cape Bon in Africa, so the basin of the West India Islands, which exceeds the Mediterranean in extent, seems to present the remains of ancient dikes which join Cape Cotoche of Yucatan to Cape San Antonio of the island of Cuba. Note: I do not pretend that this hypothesis of the rupture and the ancient continuity of lands can be extended to the eastern foot of the basin of the West Indies, that is, to the series of the volcanic islands in a line from Trinidad to Puerto Rico. End of note. And that island to Cape Tiburon of St. Domingo, Jamaica, the bank of La Vibora and the rock of Serranilla to Cape Gracias a Dios on the Mosquito shore. From this situation of the most prominent islands and capes of the continent, there results a division into 3 partial basins. The most northerly has long been distinguished by a particular denomination, that of the Gulf of Mexico. The intermediary or central basin may be called the Sea of Honduras, on account of the Gulf of that name, which makes a part of it, and the southern basin, comprehended between the Caribbean islands and the coast of Venezuela, the Isthmus of Panama, and the country of the Mosquito Indians, would form the Caribbean Sea. The modern volcanic rocks, distributed on the 2 opposite banks of the basin of the West Indies, on the east and west, but not on the north and south, is also a phenomenon worthy of attention. In the Caribbean islands, a group of volcanoes, partly extinct and partly burning, stretches from 12 to 18 degrees, and in the Cordilleras of Guatemala and Mexico, from latitude 9 to 19.5 degrees. I noticed on the northwest extremity of the basin of the West Indies that the secondary formations dip towards southeast. Along the coast of Venezuela, rocks of gneiss and primitive mica slate dip to northwest. The basalts, amygdaloids, and trachytes, which are often surmounted by tertiary limestones, appear only towards the eastern and western banks. End of chapter 3.32, part 9. Chapter 3.32, part 10, of Personal Narrative of Travels to the Equinoctial Regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, Volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt. Translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.32, Part 10. 3. The basin of the lower Orinoco, or the plains of Venezuela. This basin, like the plains of Lombardy, is open to the east. Its limits are the littoral chain of Venezuela on the north, the eastern Cordillera of New Granada on the west, and the Sierra Parima on the south. But as the latter group extends on the west only to the meridian of the cataracts of Maypures, longitude 70 degrees 37 minutes, there remains an opening or land strait running from north to south, by which the Llanos of Venezuela communicate with the basin of the Amazon and the Rio Negro. We must distinguish between the basin of the lower Orinoco, properly so called, north of that river, and the Rio Apure, and the plains of Meta and Guaviare. The latter occupy the space between the mountains of Parima and New Granada. The 2 parts of this basin have an opposite direction, but being alike covered with gramina, they usually comprehend in the country under the same denomination. Those llanos extend, in the form of an arch, from the mouth of the Orinoco by San Fernando de Apure to the confluence of the Rio Caguan with the Jupura, consequently along a length of more than 360 leagues. 3a. Part of the basin of Venezuela, running from east to west. The general slope is eastward, and the mean height from 40 to 50 toises. The western bank of that great sea of verdure, Mar de Hierbas, is formed by a group of mountains, several of which equal or exceed in height the peak of Tenerife and Mont Blanc. Of this number are the Paramos de Almorzadero, Cacota, Laura, Porquera, Mucuchis, Timotes, and Las Rosas. The height of the northern and southern banks is generally less than 500 or 600 toises. It is somewhat extraordinary that the maximum of the depression of the basin is not in its center, but on its southern limit, at the Sierra Parima. It is only between the meridians of Cape Codera and Cumana, where a great part of the littoral Cordillera of Venezuela has been destroyed, that the waters of the Llanos, the Rio Unare and the Rio Nevere, reach the northern coast. The partition ridge of this basin is formed by small tablelands, known by the names of Mesas de Amana, Guanipa, and Honoro. In the eastern part, between the meridians 63 and 66 degrees, the plains, or savannas, run southward beyond the bed of the Orinoco and the Imataca, and form, as they approach the Cujuni and the Essequibo, a kind of gulf along the Sierra Pacaraina. 3b. Part of the basin of Venezuela, running from south to north. The great breadth of this zone of savannas, from 100 to 120 leagues, renders the denomination of land strait somewhat improper, at least if it be not geognostically applied to every communication of basins bounded by high Cordilleras. Perhaps this denomination more properly belongs to that part in which is situated the group of almost unknown mountains that surround the sources of the Rio Negro. In the basin comprehended between the eastern declivity of the Andes of New Granada and the western part of the Sierra Parima, the savannas, as we have observed above, stretch far beyond the equator, but their extent does not determine the southern limits of the basin here under consideration. These limits are marked by a ridge which divides the waters between the Orinoco and the Rio Negro, a tributary stream of the Amazon. The rising of a counterslope, almost imperceptible to the eye, forms a ridge that seems to join the eastern Cordillera of the Andes to the group of the Parima. This ridge runs from Ceja, latitude 1 degree 45 minutes, or the eastern slope of the Andes of Timana, between the sources of the Guayavero and the Rio Caguan, toward the isthmus that separates the Tuamini from the Pimichin. In the Llanos, consequently, it follows the parallels of 20 degrees 30 minutes and 2 degrees 45 minutes. It is remarkable that we find the Divortia Aquarum further westward, on the back of the Andes, in the knot of mountains containing the sources of the Magdalena, at a height of 900 toises above the level of the Llanos, between the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean, and almost in the same latitude, 1 degree 45 minutes to 2 degrees 20 minutes. From the Isthmus of Javita toward the east, the line of partition of waters is formed by the mountains of the Parima group. It rises a little on the northeast toward the sources of the Orinoco, latitude 3 degrees 45 minutes, and the chain of Pacaraina, latitude 4 degrees 4 minutes to 4 degrees 12 minutes. Then during the course of 80 leagues, between the portage of the Anocapra and the banks of the Rupunuri, it runs very regularly from west to east, and finally, beyond the meridian, 61 degrees 50 minutes, it again deviates toward lower latitudes, passing between the northern sources of the Rio Surinam, the Moroni, the Oyapoc, and the southern sources of the Rio Tombretas, Curupatuba, and Paru, latitude 2 degrees to 1 degree 50 minutes. These facts suffice to prove that this first line of partition of the waters of South America, that of the northern hemisphere, traverses the whole continent between the parallels of 2 and 4 degrees. The Cassiquiare alone has cut its way across the ridge just described. The hydraulic system of the Orinoco displays the singular phenomenon of a bifurcation, where the limit of 2 basins, those of the Orinoco and the Rio Negro, crosses the bed of the principal recipient. In that part of the basin of the Orinoco, which runs in the direction of from south to north, as well as in that running from west to east, the maxima of depression are found at the foot of the Sierra Parima, we may even say, on its outline. 4. The basin of the Rio Negro and the Amazon. This is the central and largest basin of South America. It is exposed to frequent equatorial rains, and the hot and humid climate develops a force of vegetation to which nothing in the 2 continents can be compared. The central basin, bounded on the north by the Parima group and on the south by the mountains of Brazil, is entirely covered by thick forests, while the 2 basins at the extremities of the continent, the Llanos of Venezuela and the lower Orinoco, and the Pampas of Buenos Aires or the Rio de la Plata, are savannas or prairies, plains without trees, and covered with gramina. This symmetric distribution of savannas, bounded by impenetrable forests, must be connected with physical revolutions which have operated simultaneously over great surfaces. 4a. Part of the basin of the Amazon, running from east to west, between 2 degrees north and 12 degrees south, 880 leagues in length. The western shore of this basin is formed by the chain of the Andes, from the knot of the mountains of Huánuco to the sources of the Magdalena. It is enlarged by the spurs of the Rio Bene. Note. The real name of this great river, respecting the course of which geographers have been so long divided, is Uchaparu, probably water, paru of Ucha. Pene also signifies river or water, for the language of the Maypures has very many analogies with that of the Mojos, and Veni, Ueni, signifies water in Maypuri as Una in Mojo. Perhaps the river retained the name of Maypure after the Indians who spoke that language had emigrated northward in the direction of the banks of the Orinoco. End of note. Rich in gem salt and composed of several ranges of hills, latitude 8 degrees 11 minutes south, which advance into the plains on the eastern bank of the Paro. These hills are transformed on our maps into upper Cordilleras and Andes of Chaco. Towards the north, the basin of the Amazon, of which the area, 244,000 square leagues, is only 1/6 less than the area of all Europe, rises in a gentle slope toward the Sierra Parima. At 68 degrees of west longitude, the elevated part of the Sierra terminates at 3 1/2 degrees north latitude. The group of little mountains surrounding the source of the Rio Negro, the Inirida and the Hi, latitude 2 degrees, the scattered rocks between the Atabapo and the Cassiquiare, appear like groups of islands and rocks in the middle of the plain. Some of those rocks are covered with signs or symbolic sculpture. Nations very different from those who now inhabit the banks of the Cassiquiare penetrated into the savannas, and the zone of painted rocks, extending more than 150 leagues in breadth, bears traces of ancient civilization. On the east of the sporadic groups of rocks, between the meridian of the bifurcation of the Orinoco and that of the confluence of the Essequibo with the Rupunuri, the lofty mountains of the Parima commence only in 3 degrees north latitude, where the plains of the Amazon terminate. The limits of the plains of the Amazon are still less known toward the south than towards the north. The mountains that exceed 400 toises of absolute height do not appear to extend in Brazil northward of the parallels of 14 or 15 degrees of south latitude, and west of the meridian of 52 degrees. But it is not known how far the mountainous country extends, if we may call by that name a territory bristled with hills of 100 or 200 toises high. Between the Rio dos Vertentes and the Rio de Tres Barras, tributary streams of the Araguay and the Topayos, several ridges of the Mont Paracis run northward. On the right bank of the Topayos, a series of little hills advance as far as the parallel of 5 degrees south latitude to the fall, Cachoeira of Maracana, while further west, in the Rio Madeira, the course of which is nearly parallel with that of the Topayos, the rapids and cataracts indicate no rocky ridges beyond the parallel of 8 degrees. The principal depression of the basin, of which we have just examined the outline, is not near one of its banks, as in the basin of the lower Orinoco, but at the center, where the great recipient of the Amazon forms a longitudinal furrow inclining from west to east, under an angle of at least 25 degrees. The barometric measurements which I made at Javita, on the banks of the Tuamini, at Vasivia, on the banks of the Cassiquiare, and at the cataract of Rentema, in the upper Maranon, seem to prove that the rising of the llanos of the Amazon northward, at the foot of the Sierra Parima, is 150 toises, and westward, at the foot of the Cordillera of the Andes of Loja, 190 toises above the sea level. 4b. Part of the basin of the Amazon stretching from south to north. This is the zone, or land strait, by which, between 12 and 20 degrees of south latitude, the plains of the Amazon communicate with the pampas of Buenos Aires. The western bank of this zone is formed by the Andes between the knot of Porco and Potosi, and that of Huánuco and Pasco. Part of the spurs of the Rio Bene, which is but a widening of the Cordilleras of Apolobambo and Cusco, and the whole promontory of Cochabamba, advanced eastward into the plains of the Amazon. The prolongation of this promontory has given rise to the idea that the Andes are linked with a series of hills which the Serras dos Paracis and Serra Melgueira and the supposed Cordillera of San Fernando throw out towards the west. This almost unknown part of the frontiers of Brazil and Upper Peru merits the attention of travellers. It is understood that the ancient mission of San Jose de Chiquitos, nearly latitude 17 degrees, longitude 67 degrees 10 minutes, supposing Santa Cruz de la Sierra in latitude 17 degrees 25 minutes, longitude 66 degrees 47 minutes, is situated in the plains, and that the mountains of the spur of Cochabamba terminate between Guapé, Rio de Misque, and the Parapiti, which lower down takes the names of Rio San Miguel and Rio Sara. The savannas of the province of Chiquitos communicate on the north with those of Mojos, and on the southwest with those of Chaco, but a ridge or line of partition of the waters is formed by the intersection of two gently sloping plains. This ridge takes its origin on the north of La Plata, Chuquisaca, between the sources of the Guapé and the Cachimeo, and it ascends from the parallel of 20 degrees to that of 15 1/2 degrees south latitude, consequently on the northeast towards the isthmus of Villabella. From this point, one of the most important of the whole hydrography of America, we may follow the line of the partition of the water to the Cordillera of the shore, Cerro do Mar. It is seen winding, latitude 17 to 20 degrees, between the northern sources of the Araguay, the Maranhão or Tocantins, the Rio San Francisco, and the southern sources of the Parana. This second line of partition, which enters the group of the Brazil Mountains on the frontier of the Capitania of Goiás, separates the flowings of the basin of the Amazon from those of the Rio de la Plata, and corresponds, south of the equator, with the line we have indicated in the northern hemisphere, latitude 2 to 4 degrees, on the limits of the basins of the Amazon and the lower Orinoco. If the plains of the Amazon, taking that denomination in the geognostic sense we have given it, are in general distinguished from the Llanos of Venezuela and the Pampas of Buenos Aires by the extent and thickness of their forests, we are the more struck by the continuity of the savannas in that part running from south to north. It would seem as though this sea of verdure stretched forth an arm from the basin of Buenos Aires by the Llanos of Tucumán, Manso, Chuco, the Chiquitos, and the Mojos, to the Pampas del Sacramento and the savannas of Napo, Guaviare, Meta, and Apure. This arm crosses, between 7 and 3 degrees south latitude, the basin of the forests of the Amazon, and the absence of trees on so great an extent of territory, together with the preponderance which the small monocotyledonous plants have acquired, is a phenomenon of the geography of plants, which belongs perhaps to the action of ancient pelagic currents or other partial revolutions of our planet. 5. Plains of the Rio de la Plata and of Patagonia, from the southwestern slope of the group of the Brazil Mountains to the Strait of Magellan, from 20 to 53 degrees of latitude. These plains correspond with those of the Mississippi and of Canada in the northern hemisphere. If one of their extremities approaches less nearly to the polar region, the other enters much further into the region of palm trees. That part of this vast basin, extending from the eastern coast toward the Rio Paraguay, does not present a surface so perfectly smooth as the part situated on the west and the southeast of the Rio de la Plata, and which has been known for ages by the name of Pampas, derived from the Peruvian or Quechua language. Note: Hatan Pampa signifies in that language a great plain. We find the word Pampa also in Riobamba and Guayapamba, the Spaniards, in order to soften the geographical names, changing the P into B. End of note. Geognostically speaking, these two regions of west and east form only one basin, bounded on the east by the Sierra de Villarrica or do Espinhaco, which loses itself in the Capitania of St. Paul, near the parallel of 24 degrees, issuing on the northeast by little hills, from the Sierra de Canastra and the Campos Paracis, toward the province of Paraguay, on the west of the Andes of the Upper Peru and Chile, and on the northwest by the ridge of the partition of the waters, which runs from the spur of Santa Cruz de la Sierra across the plains of the Chiquitos toward the Serras of Albuquerque, latitude 19 degrees 2 minutes, and San Fernando. That part only of this basin, lying on the west of the Rio Paraguay, and which is entirely covered with gramina, is 70,000 square leagues. This surface of the Pampas or Llanos of Mansa, Tucumán, Buenos Aires, and eastern Patagonia is consequently 4 times greater than the surface of the whole of France. The Andes of Chile narrow the Pampas by the 2 spurs of Salta and Cordova. The latter promontory forms so projecting a point that there remains, latitude 31 to 32 degrees, a plain of only 45 leagues broad between the eastern extremity of the Sierra de Cordova and the right bank of the river Paraguay, stretching in the direction of a meridian from the town of Nueva Coimbra to Rosario, below Santa Fe. Far beyond the southern frontiers of the old royalty of Buenos Aires, between the Rio Colorado and the Rio Negro, latitude 38 to 39 degrees, groups of mountains seem to rise in the form of islands in the middle of a muriatiferous plain. A tribe of Indians of the south, Tehuellet, have there long borne the characteristic name of men of the mountains, Calihiwet, or Serranos. From the parallel of the mouth of the Rio Negro to that of Cabo Blanco, latitude 41 to 47 degrees, scattered mountains on the eastern Patagonian coast denote more considerable inequalities inland. All that part, however, of the Straits of Magellan, from the Virgin's Cape to the North Cape, and on the breadth of more than 30 leagues, is surrounded by savannas or pampas, and the Andes of western Patagonia only begin to rise near the latter cape, exercising a marked influence on the direction of that part of the strait nearest the Pacific, proceeding from southeast to northwest. If we have given the plains or great basins of South America the names of the rivers that flow in their longitudinal furrows, we have not meant by so doing to compare them to mere valleys. In the plains of the lower Orinoco and the Amazon, all the lines of the declivity doubtless reach a principal recipient, and the tributaries of tributary streams, that is, the basins of different orders, penetrate far into the group of the mountains. The upper parts or high valleys of the tributary streams must be considered in a geological table as belonging to the mountainous region of the country, and beyond the plains of the lower Orinoco and the Amazon. The views of the geologist are not identical with those of the hydrographer. In the basin of the Rio de la Plata and Patagonia, the waters that follow the lines of the greatest declivities have many issues. The same basin contains several valleys of rivers, and when we examine nearly the polyedric surface of the pampas and the portion of their waters which, like the waters of the steppes of Asia, do not go to sea, we conceive that these plains are divided by small ridges or lines of elevation and have alternate slopes, inclined, with reference to the horizon, in opposite directions. In order to point out more clearly the difference between geological and hydrographic views, and to prove that in the former, abstracting the course of the waters which meet in one recipient, we obtain a far more general point of view, I shall here again recur to the hydrographic basin of the Orinoco. That immense river rises on the southern slope of the Sierra Parima. It is bounded by plains on the left bank from the Cassiquiare to the mouth of the Atabapo, and flows in a basin which, geologically speaking, according to one great division of the surface of South America into 3 basins, we have called the basin of the Rio Negro and the Amazon. The low regions which are bounded by the southern and northern declivities of the Parima and Brazil mountains, and which the geologist ought to mark by one name, contain, according to the no less precise language of hydrography, 2 basins of rivers, those of the upper Orinoco and the Amazon, separated by a ridge which runs from Javita towards Esmeralda. From these considerations it results that a geological basin, sit venia verbo, may have several recipients and several emissaries, divided by small ridges, almost imperceptible. It may at the same time contain waters that flow to the sea by different furrows, independent of each other, and the systems of inland rivers flowing into lakes more or less charged with saline water. A basin of a river or hydrographic basin has but one recipient, one emissary. If by a bifurcation it gives a part of its waters to another hydrographic basin, it is because the bed of the river, or the principal recipient, approaches so near the banks of the basin or the ridge of partition that the ridge partly crosses it. The distribution of the inequalities of the surface of the globe does not present any strongly marked limits between the mountainous country and the low regions or geologic basins. Even where real chains of mountains rise like rocky dikes issuing from a crevice, spurs more or less considerable seem to indicate a lateral upheaving. While I admit the difficulty of properly defining the groups of mountains and the basins or continuous plains, I have attempted to calculate their surfaces according to the statements contained in the preceding sheets. Tables of areas for South America. Column 1, Geographical Location. Column 2, Area in square marine leagues. 1. Mountainous part. Andes, 58,900. Littoral chain of Venezuela, 1,900. Sierra Nevada de Mérida, 200. Group of the Parima, 25,800. System of the Brazil Mountains, 27,600. Total, 114,400. 2. Plains. Llanos of the lower Orinoco, the Meta, and the Guaviare, 29,000. Plains of the Amazon, 260,400. Pampas of Rio de la Plata and Patagonia, 135,200. Plains between the eastern chain of the Andes of Cundinamarca and the chain of Choco, 12,300. Plains of the shore on the west of the Andes, 20,000. Total, 456,900. The whole surface of South America contains 571,300 square leagues, 20 to a degree, and the proportion of the mountainous country to the region of the plains is as 1 to 3.9. The latter region, on the east of the Andes, comprises more than 424,600 square leagues, half of which consists of savannas, that is to say, is covered with gramina. End of chapter 3.32, part 10. Chapter 3.32, part 11, of Personal Narrative of Travels to the Equinoctial Regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, Volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt. Translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.32, Part 11. Section 2. General partition of ground. Direction and inclination of the strata. Relative height of the formations above the level of the ocean. In the preceding section, we have examined the inequalities of the surface of the soil, that is to say, the general structure of the mountains and the form of the basins rising between those variously grouped mountains. These mountains are sometimes longitudinal, running in narrow bands or chains, similar to the veins that preserve their direction at great distances, as the Andes, the littoral chain of Venezuela, the Cerro de Mar of Brazil, and the Alleghenies of the United States. Sometimes they are in masses with irregular forms, in which upheavings seem to take place as on a labyrinth of crevices or a heap of veins, as for example in the Sierra Parima and the Cerros dos Vertentes. These modes of formation are linked with the geognostic hypothesis, which has at least the recommendation of being founded on facts observed in remote times, and which strongly characterize the chains and groups of mountains. Considerations on the aspect of a country are independent of those which indicate the nature of the soil, the heterogeneity of matter, the superposition of rocks, and the direction and inclination of strata. In taking a general view of the geological constitution of a chain of mountains, we may distinguish 5 elements of direction, too often confounded in works of geognosy and physical geography. These elements are: 1. The longitudinal axis of the whole chain. 2. The line that divides the waters, divortia aquarum. 3. The line of ridges or elevation passing along the maxima of height. 4. The line that separates two contiguous formations into horizontal sections. 5. The line that follows the fissures of stratification. This distinction is the more necessary, there existing probably no chain on the globe that furnishes a perfect parallelism of all these directing lines. In the Pyrenees, for example, 1, 2, 3 do not coincide, But 4 and 5, that is, the different formations which come to light successively, and the direction of the strata, are obviously parallel to 1, or to the direction of the whole chain. We find so often, in the most distant parts of the globe, a perfect parallelism between 1 and 5, that it may be supposed that the causes which determine the direction of the axis, the angle under which that axis cuts the meridian, are generally linked with causes that determine the direction and inclination of the strata. This direction of the strata is independent of the line of the formations, or their visible limits at the surface of the soil. The lines 4 and 5 sometimes cross each other, even when one of them coincides with 1, or with the direction of the longitudinal axis of the whole chain. The relief of a country cannot be precisely explained on a map, nor can the most erroneous opinions on the locality and superposition of the strata be avoided, if we do not apprehend with clearness the relation of the directing lines just mentioned. In that part of South America to which this memoir principally relates, and which is bounded by the Amazon on the south, and on the west by the meridian of the Snowy Mountains, Sierra Nevada of Merida, the different bands or zones of formations, 4, are sensibly parallel with the longitudinal axis, 1, of the chains of mountains, basins, or interposed plains. It may be said in general that the granitic zone, including under that denomination the rocks of granite, gneiss, and mica slate, follows the direction of the Cordillera of the shore of Venezuela, and belongs exclusively to that Cordillera and the group of the Parima Mountains, since it nowhere pierces the secondary and tertiary strata in the llanos or basin of the lower Orinoco. Thence it results that the same formations do not constitute the region of plains and that of mountains. If we may be allowed to judge of the structure of the whole Sierra Parima from the part which I examined in 6 degrees of longitude and 4 degrees of latitude, we may believe it to be entirely composed of gneiss granite. I saw some beds of greenstone and amphibolic slate, but neither mica slate, clay slate, nor banks of green limestone, although many phenomena render the presence of mica slate probable on the east of the Maypures and in the chain of Pacaraina. The geological formation of the Parima group is consequently still more simple than that of the Brazilian group, in which granites, gneiss, and mica slate are covered with thonschiefer, chloritic quartz, itocolumnite, grauwacke, and transition limestone. But those two groups exhibit in common the absence of a real system of secondary rocks. We find in both only some fragments of sandstone or silicious conglomerate. In the littoral Cordillera of Venezuela, the granitic formations predominate, but they are wanting towards the east, and especially in the southern chain, where we observe, in the missions of Caripa and around the Gulf of Cariaco, a great accumulation of secondary and tertiary calcareous rocks. From the point where the littoral Cordillera is linked with the Andes of New Granada, longitude 71 1/2 degrees, we observe first the granitic mountains of Aroa and San Felipe, between the rivers Yaraqui and Tucuyo. These granitic formations extend on the east of the two coasts of the basin of the valleys of Aragua in the northern chain, as far as Cape Codera, and in the southern as far as the mountains, altas savannas, of Ocumare. After the remarkable interruption of the littoral Cordillera in the province of Barcelona, granitic rocks begin to appear in the island of Margarita and in the isthmus of Araya, and continue perhaps toward the Boca del Drago. But on the east of the meridian of Cape Codera, the northern chain is only granitic, of micaceous slate. The southern chain is entirely composed of secondary limestone and sandstone. If, in the granitic series, were a very complex formation, we would distinguish mineralogically between the rocks of granite, gneiss, and mica slate, it must be borne in mind that coarse-grained granite, not passing to gneiss, is very rare in this country. It belongs peculiarly to the mountains that bound the basin of the Lake of Valencia towards the north, for in the islands of that lake, in the mountains near Villa de Cura, and in the whole northern chain, between the meridian of Vitoria and Cape Codera, gneiss predominates, sometimes alternating with granite, or passing to mica slate. Mica slate is the most frequent rock in the peninsula of Araya and the group of Macanao, which forms the western part of the island of Margarita. On the west of Maniquarez, the mica slate of the peninsula of Araya loses by degrees its semi-metallic luster. It is charged with carbon and becomes a clay slate, Thurnschiefer, even an ampelite, a Lauenschiefer. Beds of granular limestone are most common in the primitive northern chain, and it is somewhat remarkable that they are found in gneiss and not in mica slate. We find, at the back of this granitic, or rather, mica slate gneiss soil of the southern chain, on the south of the Via de Cura, a transition stratum composed of greenstone, amphibolic serpentine, micaceous limestone, and green and carburetted slate. The most southern limit of this district is marked by volcanic rocks. Between Parapara, Ortiz, and the Cerro de Flores, latitude 9 degrees 28 minutes to 9 degrees 34 minutes, longitude 70 degrees 2 minutes to 70 degrees 15 minutes. Phonolites and amygdaloids are found on the very border of the basin of the Llanos, that vast inland sea which once filled the whole space between the Cordilleras of Venezuela and Parima. According to the observations of Major Long and Dr. James, trap formations, bulleuses, dolerites, and amygdaloids with pyroxene also border the plains or basin of the Mississippi towards the west at the declivity of the Rocky Mountains. The ancient pyrogenic rocks which I found near Parapara, where they rise in mounds with rounded summits, are the more remarkable as no others have hitherto been discovered in the whole eastern part of South America. The close connection observed in the strata of Parapara between greenstone, amphibolic serpentine, and amygdaloids containing crystals of pyroxene, the form of the Morros of San Juan, which rise like cylinders above the tableland, the granular texture of their limestone surrounded by trap rocks, are objects worthy the attention of the geologist who has studied in the southern Tyrol the effects produced by the contact of porosenic porphyries. Note: Leopold von Buch, Tableau géologique du Tyrol, page 17. M. Boussingault states that these singular Morros de San Juan, which furnish a limestone with crystalline grains and thermal springs, are hollow, and contain immense grottos filled with stalactites, which appear to have been anciently inhabited by the natives. End of note. The calcareous soil of the littoral Cordillera prevails most on the east of Cape Unare, in the southern chain. It extends to the Gulf of Paria opposite the island of Trinidad, where we find gypsum of Guira containing sulfur. I have been informed that in the northern chain also, in the Montana de Paria and near Carupana, secondary calcareous formations are found, and that they only begin to show themselves on the east of the ridge of rock called the Cerro de Miapire, which joins the calcareous group of Guacharo to the mica slate group of the peninsula of Araya. But I have not had the opportunity of ascertaining the accuracy of this information. The calcareous stratum of the southern chain is composed of two formations, which appear to be very distinct the one from the other, namely, limestone of Cumanacoa and that of Caripa. When I was on the spot, the former appeared to me to have some analogy with zechstein, or alpine limestone, the latter with Jura limestone. I even thought that the granular gypsum of Guira might be that which belongs in Europe to zechstein, or is placed between zechstein and variegated sandstone. Strata of quartzose sandstone, alternating with slaty clay, cover the limestone of Cumanacoa, Cerro del Imposible, Turimiquiri, Guarda de San Agustin, and the Jura limestone in the province of Barcelona, Aguas Calientes. According to their position, these sandstones may be considered as belonging to the formation of green sandstone, or sandstone with lignites below chalk. But if, as I thought I observed at Cocollar, sandstone forms strata in the alpine limestone before it is superposed, it appears doubtful whether the sandstone of the Imposible and of Aguas Calientes constitute one series. Muriatiferous clay, with petroleum and lamellar gypsum, covers the western part of the peninsula of Araya, opposite to the town of Cumaná, and in the centre of the island of Margarita. This clay appears to lie immediately over the mica slate, and under the calcareous breccia of the tertiary strata. I cannot decide whether Araya, which is rich in disseminated muriate of soda, belongs to the sandstone formation of the Imposible, which from its position may be compared to variegated sandstone, red marl. There is no doubt that fragments of tertiary strata surround the castle and town of Cumaná, Castillo de San Antonio, and they also appear in the southwestern extremity of the peninsula of Araya, Cerro de la Vela y del Barrigón, at the ridge of the Cerro de Miapire, near Cariaco, at Cabo Blanco, on the west of La Guaira, and on the shore of Puerto Cabello. They are consequently found at the foot of the two slopes of the northern chain of the Cordillera of Venezuela. This tertiary stratum is composed of alternate beds of calcareous conglomerate, compact limestone, marl, and clay, containing selenite and lamellar gypsum. The whole system of very recent beds appears to me to constitute but one formation, which is found at the Cerro de la Popa, near Cartagena, and in the islands of Guadeloupe and Martinico. Such is the geological distribution of the strata in the mountainous part of Venezuela, in the group of the Parima, and in the littoral Cordillera. We have now to characterize the formations of the Llanos, or of the basin of the lower Orinoco and the Apure. But it is not easy to determine the order of their superposition, because in this region ravines, or beds of torrents, and deep wells dug by the hands of man are entirely wanting. The formations of the Llanos are, first, a sandstone or conglomerate with rounded fragments of quartz, Lydian stone, and Kieselschiefer, united by a ferruginous clayey cement, extremely tenacious, olive brown, sometimes of a vivid red. Second, a compact limestone between Tisnao and Calabozo, which, by its smooth fracture and lithographic aspect, approaches the Jura limestone. Third, alternate strata of marl and lamellar gypsum, Mesa de San Diego, Ortiz, Cachipo. These three formations appear to me to succeed each other in the order I have just described, the sandstone inclining in a concave position northward on the transition slates of Malpaso and southward on the gneiss granite of Parima. As the gypsum often immediately covers the sandstone of Calabozo, which appeared to me on the spot to be identical with our red sandstone, I am uncertain of the age of its formation. The secondary rocks of the Llanos of Cumaná, Barcelona, and Caracas occupy a space of more than 5,000 square leagues. Their continuity is the more remarkable, as they appear to have no existence, at least on the east of the meridian of Puerto Cabello, 70 degrees 37 minutes, in the whole basin of the Amazon not covered by granitic sands. The causes which have favored the accumulation of calcareous matter in the eastern region of the coast chain, in the Llanos of Venezuela, from 10 1/2 to 8 degrees north, cannot have operated nearer the equator, in the group of the mountains of the Parima, and in the plains of the Rio Negro and the Amazon, latitude 1 degree north to 1 degree south. The latter plains, however, furnish some ledges of fragmentary rocks on the southwest of San Fernando de Atabapo, as well as on the southeast, in the lower part of the Rio Negro and the Rio Branco. I saw in the plains of Jaén de Bracamoros a sandstone which alternates with ledges of sand and conglomerate nodules of porphyry and Lydian stone. Messrs. Spix and Martius affirm that the banks of the Rio Negro on the south of the equator are composed of variegated sandstone. Those of the Rio Branco, Jupura, and Apopuras of Quadersandstein, and those of the Amazon on several points of ferruginous sandstone. Note: Braunus Eichenschugisches sandstein conglomerate, iron sand of the English geologists, between the Jura limestone and the green sandstone. Messrs. Spix and Martius found in the rocks of Quadersandstein, between the Apopuras and the Jupura, the same sculptures which we have pointed out from the Essequibo to the plains of Cassiquiare, and which seem to prove the migrations of a people more advanced in civilization than the Indians who now inhabit those countries. End of note. It remains to examine if, as I am inclined to suppose, the limestone and gypsum formations of the eastern part of the littoral Cordillera of Venezuela differ entirely from those of the Llanos, or to what series belongs that rocky wall named the Galera, which bounds the steppes of Calabozo towards the north. Note: is this wall a succession of rocks of dolomite, or a dike of Quadersandstein, like the Devil's Wall, Teufelsmauer, at the foot of the Harz? Calcareous shelves, coral banks, either ledges of sandstone, effects of the revulsion of the waves, or volcanic eruptions, are commonly found on the borders of great plains, that is, on the shores of ancient inland seas. The llanos of Venezuela furnish examples of such eruptions near Para, like Haruja, Mons a terre pleine, on the northern boundary of the African desert, the Sahara. Hills of sandstone rising like towers, walls, and fortified castles, and offering great analogy to Quadersandstein, bound the American desert towards the west, on the south of Arkansas. End of note. The basin of the steppes is itself the bottom of a sea destitute of islands. It is only on the south of the Apure, between that river and the Meta, near the western bank of the Sierra, that a few hills appear, as Monte Parura, the Galera de Sinaruco, and the Cerritos de San Vicente. With the exception of the fragments of tertiary strata above mentioned, there is, from the equator to the parallel of 10 degrees north, between the meridian of Sierra Nevada de Merida and the coast of Guyana, if not an absence, at least a scarcity of those petrifactions which strikes an observer recently arrived from Europe. The maxima of the height of the different formations diminish regularly in the country we are describing, with their relative ages. These maxima, for gneiss granite, Peak of Duida in the group of Parima, Silla de Caracas in the coast chain, are from 1300 to 1350 toises. For the limestone of Cumanacoa, summit or cucurucho of Turimiquiri, 1050 toises. For the limestone of Caripa, mountains surrounding the tableland of the Guarda of Saint Augustin, 750 toises. For the sandstone alternating with the limestone of Cumanacoa, Cuchilla de Guanaguana, 550 toises. For the tertiary strata, Punta Araya, 200 toises. The tract of country of which I am here describing the geological constitution is distinguished by the astonishing regularity observed in the direction of the strata of which the rocks of different eras are composed. I have already often pointed the attention of my readers to a geognostic law, one of the few that can be verified by precise measurements. Occupied since the year 1792 by the parallelism, or rather the loxodromism, of the strata, examining the direction and inclination of the primitive and transition beds from the coast of Genoa, across the chain of the Bochetta, the plains of Lombardy, the Alps of Saint Gothard, the tableland of Swabia, the mountains of Baruth, and the plains of northern Germany, I was struck with an extreme frequency, if not the uniformity, of the horary directions 3 and 4 of the compass of Freiburg, direction from southwest to northeast. This research, which I thought might lead to important discoveries relating to the structure of the globe, had then such attractions for me that it was one of the most powerful incentives of my voyage to the equator. My own observations, together with those of many able geologists, convince me that there exists in no hemisphere a general and absolute uniformity of direction, but that in regions of very considerable extent, sometimes over several thousand square leagues, we observe that the direction and, though more rarely, the inclination have been determined by a system of particular forces. We discover at great distances a parallelism, loxodromism, of the strata, a direction of which type is manifest amidst partial perturbations, and which often remains the same in primitive and transition strata. A fact which must have struck Palisson and Saussure is that in general the direction of the strata, even in those which are far distant from the principal ridges, is identical with the direction of mountain chains, that is to say, with their longitudinal axis. Venezuela is one of the countries in which the parallelism of the strata of gneiss granite, mica slate, and clay slate is most strongly marked. The general direction of these strata is north 50 degrees east, and the general inclination from 60 to 70 degrees northwest. Thus, I observed them on a length of more than 100 leagues, in the littoral chain of Venezuela, in the stratified granite of Las Trincheras at Puerto Cabello, in the gneiss of the islands of the Lake of Valencia, and in the vicinity of the Villa de Cura, in the transition slate and greenstone on the north of Parapara, in the road from La Guaira to the town of Caracas, and through all the Sierra de Avila in Cape Codera, and in the mica slate and clay slate of the peninsula of Araya. The same direction from northeast to southwest, and this inclination to northwest, are also manifest although less decidedly, in the limestones of Cumanacoa at Cuchivano and between Guanaguana and Caripa. The exceptions to this general law are extremely rare in the gneiss granite of the littoral Cordillera. It may even be affirmed that the inverse direction from southeast to northwest often bears with it the inclination towards southwest. As that part of the group of the Sierra Parima, over which I passed, contains much more granite than gneiss. Note: only the granite of the Baragon is stratified, as well as crossed by veins of granite. The direction of the beds is north, 20 degrees west, end of note, and other rocks distinctly stratified. The direction of the layers could be observed in this group only on a small number of points, but I was often struck in this region with the continuity of the phenomenon of loxodromism. The amphibolic slates of Angostura run north, 45 degrees east, like the gneiss of Guapasoso, which forms the bed of the Atabapo, and like the mica slate of the peninsula of Araya, though there is a distance of 160 leagues between the limits of those rocks. The direction of the strata of which we have just noticed the wonderful uniformity is not entirely parallel with the longitudinal axes of the two coast chains and the chain of Parima. The strata generally cut the former of those chains at an angle of 35 degrees, and their inclination toward the northwest becomes one of the most powerful causes of the aridity which prevails on the southern declivity of the mountains of the coast. Note: this southern declivity is however less rapid than the northern. End of note. May we conclude that the direction of the eastern Cordillera of New Granada, which is nearly north, 45 degrees east, from Santa Fe de Bogota, to beyond the Sierra Nevada de Merida, and of which the littoral chain is but a continuation, has had an influence on the direction, hor 3 to 4, of the strata of Venezuela? That region presents a very remarkable loxodromism, with the strata of mica slate, grauwacke, and the orthoceratite limestone of the Alleghenies, and that vast extent of country, latitude 56 to 68 degrees, lately visited by Captain Franklin. The direction northeast to southwest prevails in every part of North America, as in Europe in the Fichtelgebirge of Franconia, the Taunus, Westerwald, and Eifel, in the Ardennes, the Vosges, in Cotentin, in Scotland, and in the Tarentaise at the southwest extremity of the Alps. If the strata of rocks in Venezuela do not exactly follow the direction of the nearest Cordillera, that of the shore, the parallelism between the axis of one chain and the strata of the formations that compose it are manifest in the Brazil group. Note: the strata of the primitive and intermediary rocks of Brazil run very regularly, like the Cordillera of Villarica, Cerro de Espinhaco, hor 1.4, or hor 2, of the compass of Freiburg, north 28 degrees east. End of note. End of chapter 3.32, part 11. Chapter 3.32, part 12, of Personal Narrative of Travels to the Equinoctial Regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, Volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt, translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.32, Part 12. Section 3. Nature of the rocks. Relative age and superposition of the formations. Primitive, transition, secondary, tertiary, and volcanic strata. The preceding section has developed the geographical limits of the formations, the extent of the direction of the zones of gneiss granite, mica slate gneiss, clay slate sandstone, and intermediary limestone, which come successively to light. We will now indicate succinctly the nature and relative age of these formations. To avoid confounding facts with geological opinions, I shall describe these formations, without dividing them, according to the method generally followed, into 5 groups: primitive, transition, secondary, tertiary, and volcanic rocks. I was fortunate enough to discover the types of each group in a region where, before I visited it, no rock had been named. The great inconvenience of the old classifications is that of obliging the geologist to establish fixed demarcations, while he is in doubt, if not respecting the spot or the immediate superposition, at least respecting the number of the formations which are not developed. How can we in many circumstances determine the analogy existing between a limestone with but few petrifactions and an intermediary limestone and zechstein, or between a sandstone superposed on a primitive rock and a variegated sandstone and quadersandstein, or finally, between muriatiferous clay and the red marl of England, or the gem salt of the tertiary strata of Italy? When we reflect on the immense progress made within 25 years in the knowledge of the superposition of rocks, it will not appear surprising that my present opinion on the relative age of the formations of equinoctial America is not identically the same with what I advanced in 1800. To boast of a stability of opinion in geology is to boast of an extreme indolence of mind. It is to remain stationary amidst those who go forward. What we observe in any one part of the earth on the composition of rocks, their subordinate strata, and the order of their position are facts immutably true and independent of the progress of positive geology in other countries, while the systematic names applied to any particular formation of America are founded only on the supposed analogies between the formations of America and those of Europe. Now those names cannot remain the same if, after further examination, the objects of comparison have not retained the same place in the geological series. If the most able geologists now take for transition limestone and green sandstone what they took formerly for zechstein and variegated sandstone, I believe the surest means by which geologic descriptions may be made to survive the change which science undergoes in proportion to its progress will be to substitute provisionally in the description of formations for the systematic names of red sandstone, variegated sandstone, zechstein, and Jura limestone, names derived from American localities, as sandstone of the Llanos, limestone of Cumanacoa and Caripa, and to separate the enumeration of facts relative to the superposition of soils from the discussion on the analogy of those soils with those of the Old World. Note: positive geography being nothing but a question of the series or succession, either simple or periodical, of certain terms represented by the formations, it may be necessary, in order to understand the discussions contained in the third section of this memoir, to enumerate succinctly the table of formations considered in the most general point of view. 1. Strata commonly called primitive: granite, gneiss, and mica slate, or gneiss oscillating between granite and mica slate. Very little primitive clay slate, weisstein with serpentine, granite with disseminated amphibole, amphibolic slate, veins and small layers of greenstone. 2. Transition strata, composed of fragmentary rocks, grauwacke, calcareous slate, and greenstone, earliest remains of organized existence, bamboos, madrepores, producta, trilobites, orthoceratites, evamphylites. Complex and parallel formations: A. Alternate beds of gray and stratified limestone, anthracitic mica slate, anhydrous gypsum and grauwacke. B. Clay slate, black limestone, grauwacke with greenstone, syenite, transition granite, and porphyries with a base of compact feldspar. C. Euphatides, sometimes pure and covered with jasper, sometimes mixed with amphibole, hyperstein, and gray limestone. D. Pyroxenic porphyries with amygdaloids and zirconian cyanites. 3. Secondary strata, presenting a much smaller number of monocotyledonous plants. A. Coordinate and almost contemporary formations, with red sandstone, Rhodototus liganda, quartz porphyry, and fern coal. These strata are less connected by alternation than by opposition. The porphyries issue, like the trachytes of the Andes, in domes from the bosom of intermediary rocks. Porphyritic breccias which envelop the quartzose porphyries. B. Zechstein, or alpine limestone with marly, bituminous slate, fetid limestone, and variegated gypsum, Productus aculatus. C. Variegated sandstone, Buntersandstein, with frequent beds of limestone, false oolites. The upper beds are of variegated marl, often muriatiferous, red marl, saltstone, with hydrated gypsum and fetid limestone. The gem salt oscillates from zechstein to muschelkalk. D. Limestone of Göttingen or Muschelkalk, alternating towards the top with white sandstone or brittle sandstein. Ammonitis nodosus, encrinites, Mytilus socialis. Clayey marl is found at the two extremities of Muschelkalk. E. White sandstone, brittle sandstein, alternating with lias, or limestone with graphites, a quantity of dicotyledonous mixed with monocotyledonous plants. F. Jura limestone of complex formation, a quantity of sandy, intercalated marl. We most frequently observe, counting from below upwards, lias, marly limestone with graphites, oolites, limestone with polypi, slaty limestone with fish, crustacea, and globules of oxide of iron, ammonites planulatus, Griffia arcuata. G. Secondary sandstone with lignites, iron sand, Wealden clay, green sand or green sandstone. H. Chlorite, tufted and white chalk, plainer calc, limestone of Verona. 4. Tertiary strata, showing a much smaller number of dicotyledonous plants. A. Clay and tertiary sandstone with lignites, plastic clay, molasse, and nagelfluh, sometimes alternating where chalk is wanting, with the last beds of Jura limestone, amber. B. Limestone of Paris or coarse limestone, limestone with circles, limestone of Boca, limestone of London, sandy limestone of Bognor, lignites. C. Silicious limestone and gypsum with fossil bones alternating with marl. D. Sandstone of Fontainebleau. E. Lacustrine soil with porous millstone grit. E. Alluvial deposits. End of note. 1. Coordinate formations of granite, gneiss, and mica slate. There are countries, in France, the vicinity of Lyon, in Germany, Freiburg, Nauendorf, where the formations of granite and gneiss are extremely distinct. There are others, on the contrary, where the geologic limits between those formations are slightly marked, and where granite, gneiss, and mica slate appear to alternate by layers or pass often from one to the other. These alternations and transitions appear to me less common in the littoral Cordillera of Venezuela than in the Sierra Parima. We recognize successively in the former of these two systems of mountains, above all in the chain nearest the coast, as predominating rocks from west to east, granite, longitude 70 to 71 degrees, gneiss, longitude 68 1/2 to 70 degrees, and mica slate, longitude 65 3/4 to 66 1/2 degrees. But considering altogether the geologic constitution of the coast and the Sierra Parima, we prefer to treat of granite, gneiss, and mica slate, if not as one formation, at least as three coordinate formations closely linked together. The primitive clay slate, Urntonschiefer, is subordinate to mica slate, of which it is only a modification. It no more forms an independent stratum in the new continent than in the Pyrenees and the Alps. A. Granite, which does not pass to gneiss, is most common in the western part of the coast chain, between Turmero, Valencia, and Porto Cabello, as well as in the circle of the Sierra Parima, near the Encaramada, and at the peak of the Duida. At the Rincon del Diablo, between Mariara and Hacienda de Cura, and at Chuao, it is coarse-grained and contains fine crystals of feldspar, 1 1/2 inches long. It is divided in prisms by perpendicular vents, or stratified regularly, like secondary limestone, at Las Trincheras, the Strait of Baraguan in the valley of the Orinoco, and near Guapasoso on the banks of the Atabapo. The stratified granite of Las Trincheras, giving birth to a very hot springs, from 90.5 degrees centigrade, appears from the inclination of its layers to be superposed on gneiss, which is seen further southward in the islands of the Lake of Valencia, but conjectures of superposition founded only on the hypothesis of an indefinite prolongation of the strata are doubtful, and possibly the granite masses which form a small particular zone in the northern range of the littoral Cordillera, between 70 degrees 3 minutes and 70 degrees 50 minutes longitude, were upheaved in piercing the gneiss. The latter rock is prevalent, both in descending from the Rincon del Diablo southward to the hot springs of Mariara, and towards the banks of the Lake of Valencia, and in advancing on the east towards the group of Buena Vista, the Silla of Caracas, and Cape Codera. In the region of the littoral chain of Venezuela, where granite seems to constitute an independent formation from 15 to 16 leagues in length, I saw no foreign or subordinate layers of gneiss, mica slate, or primitive limestone. Note: Primitive limestone, everywhere so common in mica slate and gneiss, is found in the granite of the Pyrenees, at Port de Haut, and in the mountains of Labour. The Sierra Parima is one of the most extensive granitic strata existing on the globe, but the granite, which is seen alike bare on the flanks of the mountains and in the plains by which they are joined, often passes into gneiss. Note. To prove the extent of the continuity of this granitic stratum, it will suffice to observe that M. Leschenault de la Tour collected in the bars of the river Mana in French Guiana the same gneiss granites with a little amphibole, which I observed 300 leagues more to the west, near the confluence of the Orinoco and the Guaviare. Granite is most commonly found in its granular composition and independent formation near Encaramada, at the Strait of Baraguan, and in the vicinity of the mission of the Esmeralda. It often contains, like the granites of the Rocky Mountains, latitude 38 to 40 degrees, the Pyrenees and southern Tyrol, amphibolic crystals, disseminated in the mass but without passing to syenite. Note. I did not observe this mixture of amphibole in the granite of the littoral chain of Venezuela, except at the summit of the Silla of Caracas. Those modifications are observed on the banks of the Orinoco, the Cassiquiare, the Atabapo, and the Tuamini. The blocks heaped together, which are found in Europe on the ridge of granitic mountains, the Reisegebirge in Silesia, the Oschenkopf in Franconia, are especially remarkable in the northwest part of the Sierra Parima, between Quecara, the Encaramada, and Uruana, in the cataracts of the Maypures, and at the mouth of the Rio Vichada. It is doubtful whether these masses, which are of cylindrical form, parallelepipedons rounded on the edge, or balls of 40 to 50 feet in diameter, are the effect of a slow decomposition or of a violent and instantaneous upheaving. The granite of the southeastern part of Sierra Parima sometimes passes to pegmatite, composed of laminary feldspar, enclosed in curved masses of crystalline quartz. Note. Schrift granite. It is a simple modification of the composition and texture of granite, and not a subordinate layer. It must not be confounded with the real pegmatite, generally destitute of mica, or with the geographic stones, piedras mapajas, of the Orinoco, which contain streaks of dark green mica, irregularly disposed. I saw gneiss only in subordinate layers. Note. The magnetic sands of the rivers that furrow the granitic chain of the Encaramada seem to denote the proximity of amphibolic or chloritic strate, hornblende, or chloritschiefer, either in layers in the granite or superposed on that rock. But between Javita, San Carlos del Rio Negro, and the peak of Duida, the granite is traversed by numerous veins of different ages, abounding with rock crystal, black tourmaline, and pyrites. It appears that these open veins become more common on the east of the peak of Duida, in the Sierra Pacaraina, especially between Jurumu and Rupunuri, tributaries of the Rio Branco and the Essequibo, where Hortsman discovered, instead of diamonds and emeralds, a mine, of rock crystal. Note. These legends of diamonds are very ancient on the coast of Paria. Petrus Martyr relates that, at the beginning of the 16th century, a Spaniard named Andres Morales bought of a young Indian of the coast of Paria adamantum mire pretiosum duos infantus digiti articulos longum magni autum policis articulum equentum crassitudine acutum utrabic et costus octo pulchre formatus constantum. A diamond of marvellous value, as long as 2 joints of an infant's finger, and as thick as the joints of its thumb, sharp on both sides, and of a beautiful octagonal shape. This pretended Adamas juvenis pariensis resisted the action of lime. Petrus Martyr distinguishes it from topaz by adding, often durunt et topazios in littore. They pay no heed to topazes on the coast. That is of Paria, Saint Marta, and Veragua. See Oceanica, Dec 3, Lib 4, page 53. B. Gneiss predominates along the littoral Cordillera of Venezuela, with the appearance of an independent formation, in the northern chain from Cerro de Chuao and the meridian of Choroni, as far as Cape Codera, and in the southern chain from the meridian of Guiana to the mouth of the Rio Tuy. Cape Codera, the great mass of the Silla of Galipano, and the land between Guaira and Caracas, the tableland of Buena Vista, the islands of the lake of Valencia, the mountains between Guiana, Maria Magdalena, and the Cerro de Chacao are composed of gneiss. Note. I have been assured that the islands of Orchila and Los Frailes are also composed of gneiss. Curaçao and Bonaire are calcareous. Is the island of Oruba, in which nuggets of native gold of considerable size have been found, primitive? End of note. Yet, amidst this soil of gneiss, enclosed mica slate reappears, often talcous in the Valle de Carimare, and in the ancient Provincia de los Mariches, at Cabo Blanco, west of La Guaira, near Caracas and Antimano, and above all, between the tableland of Buena Vista and the valleys of Aragua, in the Montana de las Cocuizas, and at Hacienda del Tuy. Between the limits here assigned to gneiss, as a predominant rock, longitude 68 1/2 to 70 1/2 degrees, gneiss passes sometimes to mica slate, while the appearance of a transition to granite is only found on the summit of the Silla of Caracas. Note. The Silla is a mountain of gneiss, like Adam's Peak in the island of Ceylon, and of nearly the same height. End of note. It would require a more careful examination than I was able to devote to the subject to ascertain whether the granite of the Peak of San Gotard and of the Silla of Caracas really lies over mica slate and gneiss, or if it has merely pierced those rocks, rising in the form of needles or domes. The gneiss of the littoral Cordillera, in the province of Caracas, contains almost exclusively garnets, rutile titanite, and graphite, disseminated in the whole mass of the rock, shelves of granular limestone, and some metalliferous veins. I shall not decide whether the granitiferous serpentine of the tableland of Buena Vista is enclosed in gneiss, or whether, superposed upon that rock, it does not rather belong to the formation of Weisstein, heptonite, similar to that of Penig and Mittweida in Saxony. In that part of the Sierra Parima which M. Bonpland and myself visited, gneiss forms a less marked zone, and oscillates more frequently toward granite than mica slate. I found no garnets in the gneiss of Parima. There is no doubt that the gneiss granite of the Orinoco is slightly auriferous on some points. C. Mica slate, with clay slate, thonschiefer, forms a continuous stratum in the northern chain of the littoral Cordillera, from the point of Araya, beyond the meridian of Cariaco, as well as in the island of Margarita. It contains, in the peninsula of Araya, garnets disseminated in the mass, cyanite, and, when it passes to clayey slate, small layers of native alum. Mica slate, constituting an independent formation, must be distinguished from mica slate, subordinate to a stratum of gneiss, on the east of Cape Codera. The mica slate subordinate to gneiss presents, in the valley of Tuy, shelves of primitive limestone, and small strata of graphitic ampelite, Zeichschiefer, between Cabo Blanco and Catia, layers of chloritic granitiferous slate and slaty amphibole, and between Caracas and Antimano, the more remarkable phenomenon of veins of gneiss enclosing balls of granitiferous diorite, grunstein. In the Sierra Parima, mica slate predominates only in the most eastern part, where its luster has led to strange errors. The amphibolic slate of Angostura and masses of diorite in balls with concentric layers near Muitaco appear to be superposed, not on mica slate, but immediately on gneiss granite. I could not, however, distinctly ascertain whether a part of thus pyritous diorite was not enclosed on the banks of the Orinoco, as it is at the bottom of the sea near Cabo Blanco, and at the Montana de Avila, in the rock which it covers. Very large veins, with an irregular direction, often assume the aspect of short layers, and the balls of diorite heaped together in hillocks may, like many cones of basalt, issue from the crevices. Mica slate, chloritic slate, and the rocks of slaty amphibole contain magnetic sand in the tropical regions of Venezuela, as in the most northern regions of Europe. The garnets are there almost equally disseminated in the gneiss, Caracas, the mica slate, peninsula of Araya, the serpentine, Buena Vista, the chloritic slate, Cabo Blanco, and the diorite or greenstone, Antimano. These garnets reappear in the trachytic porphyries that crown the celebrated metalliferous mountains of Potosi, and in the black and pyroxenic masses of the small volcano of Llana Urca at the back of Chimborazo. Petroleum, and this phenomenon is well worthy of attention, issues from a soil of mica slate in the Gulf of Cariaco. Further east, on the banks of Arco and near Cariaco, it seems to gush from secondary limestone formations, but probably that happens only because those formations repose on mica slate. The hot springs of Venezuela have also their origin in, or rather below, the primitive rocks. They issue from granite, Las Trincheras, gneiss, Mariara, and Onoto, and the calcareous and arenaceous rocks that cover the primitive rocks, Morros de San Juan, Bergantin, Cariaco. The earthquakes and subterraneous detonations, of which the seat has been erroneously sought in the calcareous mountains of Cumaná, have been felt with most violence in the granitic soils of Caracas and the Orinoco. Igneous phenomena, if their existence be really well certified, are attributed by the people to the granitic peaks of Duida and Guaraco, and also to the calcareous mountains of Cuchivano. From these observations, it results that gneiss granite predominates in the immense group of the mountains of the Parima, as mica slate gneiss prevails in the Cordillera of the coast, that in the two systems the granitic soil, unmixed with gneiss and mica slate, occupies but a very small extent of country, and that in the coast chain the formations of clayey slate, thurnschiefer, mica slate, gneiss, and granite succeed each other in such a manner on the same line from east to west, presenting a very uniform and regular inclination of their strata towards the northwest, that, according to the hypothesis of a subterraneous prolongation of the strata, the granite of Las Trincheras and the Rincon del Diablo may be superposed on the gneiss of the Villa de Cura, of Buena Vista and Caracas, and the gneiss superposed in its turn on the mica slate and clayey slate of Maniquarez and Chuparuparu in the peninsula of Araya. This hypothesis of a prolongation of every rock, in some sort indefinite, founded on the angle of inclination presented by the strata appearing at the surface, is not admissible. And according to similar equally vague reasoning, we should be forced to consider the primitive rocks of the Alps of Switzerland as superposed on the formation of the compact limestone of Auschenberg, and that, transition or identical with Zechstein, in turn as being superposed on the molasses of the tertiary strata. End of chapter 3.32, part 12. Chapter 3.32, part 13, of personal narrative travels to the equinoctial regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt, translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.32, part 13. 2. Formation of the clay slate, Thonschiefer, of Malpaso. If, in the sketch of the formations of Venezuela, I had followed the received division into primitive, intermediary, secondary, and tertiary strata, I might be doubtful what place the last stratum of mica slate in the peninsula of Araya should occupy. This stratum, in the ravine, arroyo, of Robalo, passes insensibly in a carburetted and shining slate into a real ampelite. The direction and inclination of the stratum remain the same, and the Thonschiefer, which takes the look of a transition rock, is but a modification of the primitive mica slate of Maniquarez, containing garnets, cyanite, and rutile titanite. These insensible passages from primitive to transition strata by clay slate, which becomes carburetted at the same time that it presents a concordant position with mica slate and gneiss, have also been observed several times in Europe by celebrated geologists. The existence of an independent formation of primitive slate, Thonschiefer, may even be doubted, that is, of a formation which is not joined below by strata containing some vestiges of monocotyledonous plants. The small Thonschiefer bed of Malpaso, in the southern chain of the littoral Cordillera, is separated from mica slate gneiss by a coordinate formation of serpentine and diorite. It is divided into two shelves, of which the upper presents green steatitous slate mixed with amphibole, and the lower dark blue slate, extremely fissile and traversed by numerous veins of quartz. I could discover no fragmentary stratum, Grauwacke, nor Kieselschiefer, nor chiastolite. the kieselschiefer belongs in those countries to a limestone formation. I have seen fine specimens of chiastolite, macul, which the Indians wore as amulets, and which came from the Sierra Nevada de Merida. This substance is probably found in transition slate, for Messrs. Rivero and Boussingault observed rocks of clay slate at the height of 2,120 toises in the Paramo of Moquichis, ongoing from Trujillo to Merida. Note. In Galicia, in Spain, I saw the thonschiefer containing chiastolite alternate with grauwacke, but the chiastolite unquestionably belongs also to rocks which all geologists have hitherto called primitive rocks, to mica schists intercalated like layers in granite, and to an independent stratum of mica slate. End of note. 3. Formation of serpentine and diorite, greenstone of Juncalito. We have indicated above a layer of granitiferous serpentine enclosed in the gneiss of Buena Vista, or perhaps superposed on that rock. We here find a real stratum of serpentine alternating with diorite and extending from the ravine of Tucutunimo as far as Juncalito. Diorite forms the great mass of this stratum. It is of a dark green color, granular, with small grains, and destitute of quartz. Its mass is formed of small crystals of feldspar intermixed with crystals of amphibole. This rock of diorite is covered at its surface by the effect of decomposition with a yellowish crust like that of basalts and dolerites. Serpentine, of a dull olive green and smooth fracture, mixed with bluish steatite and amphibole, presents, like almost all the coordinate formations of diorite and serpentine, in Silesia, at Fichtelgebirge, in the valley of Begori in the Pyrenees, in the island of Cyprus, and in the copper mountains of circumpolar America, traces of copper. Note. Franklin's Journey to the Polar Sea, page 529. End of note. Where the dolerite, particularly globular, approaches the green slate of Malpaso, real beds of green slate are found enclosed in diorite. The fine saussurite, which we saw in the upper Orinoco, in the hands of the Indians, seems to indicate the existence of a soil of euphotide superposed on gneiss granite or amphibolic slate in the eastern part of the Sierra Parima. 4. Granular and micaceous limestone of the Morros of San Juan. The Morros of San Juan rise like ruinous towers in a soil of diorite. They are formed of a cavernous grayish-green limestone of crystalline texture mixed with some spangles of mica, and are destitute of shells. We see in them masses of hardened clay, black, fissile, charged with iron, and covered with a crust, yellow from decomposition, like basalts and amphiboles. A compact limestone, containing vestiges of shells, adjoins this granular limestone of the Morros of San Juan, which is hollow within. Probably on a further examination of the extraordinary strata between Villa de Cura and Ortiz, of which I had time only to collect some few specimens, many phenomena may be discovered analogous to those which Leopold von Buch has lately described in South Tyrol. M. Boussingault, in a memoir which he has recently addressed to me, calls the rock of the Morros a problematic calcariferous gneiss. This expression seems to prove that the plates of mica take in some parts a uniform direction, as in the greenish dolomite of Val Tochia. 5. Feldspathic sandstone of the Orinoco. The gneiss granite of the Sierra Parima is covered in some few places between the Encaramada and the Strait of Baraguan, and in the island of Guachaco, in its western part, with an olive-brown sandstone containing grains of quartz and fragments of feldspar, joined by an extremely compact clayey cement. This cement, where it abounds, has a conchoidal fracture and passes to jasper. It is crossed by small veins of brown iron ore, which separate into very thin plates or scales. The presence of feldspar seems to indicate that this small formation of sandstone, the sole secondary formation hitherto known in the Sierra Parima, belongs to red sandstone or coal. Note. Broken and intact crystals of feldspar are found in the Tota Liganda coal sandstone of Thuringia. I observed in Mexico a very singular agglomerated feldspar formation superposed upon, and perhaps enclosed in, red sandstone near Guanajuato. End of note. I hesitate to class it with the sandstone of the Llanos, the relative antiquity of which appears to me to be less satisfactorily verified. 6. Formation of the sandstone of the Llanos of Calabozo. I arranged the various formations in the order which I fancied I could discern on the spot. The carburetted slate, Thonschiefer, of the peninsula of Araya, connects the primitive rocks of gneiss granite and mica slate gneiss with the transition strata, blue and green slate, diorite, serpentine mixed with amphibole, and granular greenish-gray limestone of Malpaso, Tucutunemo, and San Juan. On the south, the sandstone of the Llanos rests on this transition strata. It is destitute of shells and composed, like the savannas of Calabozo, of rounded fragments of quartz, kieselschiefer, and Lydian stone, cemented by a ferruginous olive-brown clay. Note: in Germany, sandstones which belong unquestionably to red sandstone contain also, near Weiderstadt in Thuringia, nodules and rounded fragments. I shall not cite the pudding stone subordinate to the red sandstone of the Pyrenees, because the age of that sandstone, destitute of coal, may be disputed. Layers of very large rounded nodules of quartz are enclosed in the coal sandstone of Thuringia and in Upper Silesia. End of note. We there find fragments of wood, in great part monocotyledonous, and masses of brown iron ore. Some strata, as in the Mesa de Paja, present grains of very fine quartz. I saw no fragments of porphyry or limestone. Those immense beds of sandstone that cover the Llanos of the lower Orinoco and the Amazon well deserve the attention of travelers. In appearance, they approximate to the pudding stones of the molasses stratum, in which calcareous vestiges are also often wanting, as in Schotteville and Diesbach in Switzerland, but they appeared to me by their position to have no more relation to red sandstone. Nowhere can they be confounded with the grauwackes, fragmentary transition rocks, which Messrs. Boussingault and Rivero found along the Cordilleras of New Granada, bordering the steppes on the west. Does the want of fragments of granite, gneiss, and porphyry, and the frequency of petrified wood, sometimes dicotyledonous, indicate that those sandstones belong to the more recent formations which fill the plains between the Cordillera of the Parima and the coast Cordillera, as the molasses of Switzerland fills the space between the Jura and the Alps? Note: the people of the country attribute those woods to the Alcornoco, Baudicia virgilioides, see Novagen et Spec Plant, Volume 3, page 377, and to the Chaparobovo Rhopala complicata. It is believed in Venezuela, as in Egypt, that petrified wood is formed in our times. I found this dicotyledonous petrified wood only at the surface of the soil, and not enclosed in the sandstone of the Llanos. Monsieur Caillot made the same observation on going to the oasis of Siwa. The trunks of trees 90 feet long, enclosed in the red sandstone of Kiffhauser in Saxony, are, according to the recent researches of von Buch, divided into joints, and are certainly monocotyledonous. End of note. It is not easy, when several formations are not perfectly developed, to determine the age of arenaceous rocks. The most able geologists do not concur in opinion respecting the sandstone of the Black Forest, and of the whole country southwest of the Thüringer Waldgebirge. M. Boussingault, who passed through a part of the steppes of Venezuela long after me, is of opinion that the sandstone of the Llanos of San Carlos, that of the valley of San Antonio de Cucuta, and the tablelands of Barquisimeto, Tocuyo, Merida, and Trujillo, belong to a formation of old red sandstone or coal. There is in fact real coal near Carache, southwest of the Paramo de las Rosas. Before a part of the immense plains of America was geologically examined, it might have been supposed that their uniform and continued horizontality was caused by alluvial soils, or at least by arenaceous tertiary strata. The sands, which in the Baltic provinces and in all the north of Germany cover coarse limestone and chalk, seem to justify these systematic ideas, which have been extended to the Sahara and the steppes of Asia. But the observations which we have been able to collect sufficiently prove that both in the Old and the New World, both plains, steppes, and deserts contain numerous formations of different eras, and that these formations often appear without being covered by alluvial deposits. Jura limestone, gem salt, plains of the Meta and Patagonia, and coal sandstone are found in the llanos of South America, quadersandstein. Note: the forms of these rocks in walls and pyramids, or divided in rhomboid blocks, seems no doubt to indicate quadersandstein, but the sandstone of the eastern declivity of the Rocky Mountains, in which the learned traveller Mr. James found salt springs, licks, strata of gypsum, and no coal, appear rather to belong to variegated sandstone, bluntersandstein. End of note. A saliferous soil, beds of coal. Note: this coal immediately covers, as in Belgium, the grauwacke, or transition sandstone. End of note. And limestone with trilobites. Note: in the plains of the upper Missouri, the limestone is immediately covered by a secondary limestone with turritulites, believed to be Jurassic, while a limestone with griffiae, rich in lead ore, and which I should have believed to be still more ancient than oolitic limestone and analogous to lias, is described by Mr. James as lying above the most recent formation of sandstone. Has this superposition been well ascertained? End of note. Fill the plains of Louisiana and Canada. In examining the specimens collected by the indefatigable Caillot in the Libyan desert and the oasis of Siwa, we recognize sandstone similar to that of Thebes. Fragments of petrified dicotyledonous wood from 30 to 40 feet long, with rudiments of branches and medullary concentric layers, coming perhaps from tertiary sandstone with lignites. Note: formation of molasses. End of note. Chalk with spatangi and anakites, Jura limestone with nummulites, partly agatized, another fine-grained limestone employed in the construction of the temple of Jupiter Ammon, Beda. Note: M. von Buch very reasonably inquires whether this statuary limestone, which resembles Parian marble, and limestone become granular by contact with the systematic granite of Predazzo, is a modification of the limestone with nummulites of Siwa. The primitive rocks from which the fine-grained marble was believed to be extracted, if there be no deception in its granular appearance, are far distant from the oasis of Siwa. End of note. And gem salt with sulfur and bitumen. These examples sufficiently prove that the plains, llanos, steppes, and deserts have not that uniform tertiary formation which has been too generally supposed. Do the fine pieces of riband jasper or Egyptian pebbles, which M. Bonpland picked up in the savannas of Barcelona, near Curataquiche, belong to the sandstone of the llanos of Calabozo, or to a stratum superposed on that sandstone? The former of these suppositions would approach, according to the analogy of the observations made by M. Rosier in Egypt, the sandstone of Calabozo, or tertiary Nagelfluh. 7. Formation of the compact limestone of Cumanacoa. A bluish-gray compact limestone, almost destitute of petrifactions, and frequently intersected by small veins of carburetted lime, forms mountains with very abrupt ridges. These layers have the same direction and the same inclination as the mica slate of Araya. Where the flank of the limestone mountains of New Andalusia is very steep, we observe, as at Achenberg, near Altdorf in Switzerland, layers that are singularly arched or turned. The tints of the limestone of Cumanacoa vary from darkish grey to bluish white, and sometimes pass from compact to granular. It contains, as substances accidentally disseminated in the mass, brown iron ore, spathic iron, even rock crystal. As subordinate layers it contains 1. Numerous strata of carburetted and slaty marl with pyrites. 2. Quartzose sandstone, alternating with very thin strata of clayey slate. 3. Gypsum, with sulfur near Guira in the Golfo Triste on the coast of Paria. As I did not examine on the spot the position of this yellowish-white, fine-grained gypsum, I cannot determine with any certainty its relative age. This sandstone contains springs. In general, it only covers the limestone of Cumanacoa, but it appeared to me to be sometimes enclosed. The only petrifactions of shells which I found in this limestone formation consist of a heap of turbinites and trockites on the flank of Turimiquiri, at more than 680 toises high, and an ammonite 7 inches in diameter in the Montana de Santa Maria, north-northwest of Caripe. I nowhere saw the limestone of Cumanacoa, of which I treat specially in this article, resting on the sandstone of the Llanos. If there be any such superposition, it must be found on descending the tableland of Cocollar towards the Mesa de Amana. On the southern coast of the Gulf of Cariaco, the limestone formation probably covers, without the interposition of another rock, a mica slate, which passes to carburetted clay slate. In the northern part of the Gulf, I distinctly saw this clayey formation at a depth of 2 or 3 fathoms in the sea. The submarine hot springs appear to me to gush from mica slate, like the petroleum of Maniquarez. If any doubts remain as to the rock on which the limestone of Cumanacoa is immediately superposed, there is none respecting the rocks which cover it, such as 1. The tertiary limestone of Cumaná near Punta Delgada and at Cerro de Miapire; 2. The sandstone of Quetepe and Turimiquiri, which, forming layers also in the limestone of Cumanacoa, belongs properly to the latter soil. The limestone of Caripe, which we have often identified in the course of this work with Jura limestone, and of which we shall speak in the following article. 8. Formation of the compact limestone of Caripa. Descending the Cuchillo de Guanaguana towards the convent of Caripa, we find another more recent formation, white, with a smooth or slightly conchoidal fracture, and divided in very thin layers, which succeeds to the bluish-grey limestone formation of Cumanacoa. I call this, in the first instance, the limestone formation of Caripa, on account of the cavern of that name, inhabited by thousands of nocturnal birds. This limestone appeared to me to be identical, 1. with the limestone of the Morro de Barcelona and the Chimanas Islands, which contains small layers of black kieselschiefer, slaty jasper, without veins of quartz, and breaking into fragments of parallelopiped form; 2. with the whitish-grey limestone with smooth fracture of Tisnao, which seems to cover the sandstone of the Llanos. We find the formation of Caripe in the island of Cuba, between the Havana and Batabano, and between the port of Trinidad and Rio Guaurabo, as well as in the small Cayman Islands. I have hitherto described the secondary limestone formations of the littoral chain without giving them the systematic names which may connect them with the formations of Europe. During my stay in America, I took the limestone of Cumanacoa for zechstein, or alpine limestone, and that of Caripe for Jura limestone. The carburetted and slightly bituminous marl of Cumanacoa, analogous to the strata of bituminous slate, which are very numerous in the Alps of southern Bavaria. Note: I found them also in the Peruvian Andes near Montau at the height of 1600 toises. End of note. Appeared to me to characterize the former of these formations, while the dazzling whiteness of the cavernous stratum of Caripa and the form of those shelves of rocks rising in walls and cornices forcibly reminded me of the Jura limestone of Streitberg in Franconia, or of Oitzau and Kresovec in Upper Silesia. There is in Venezuela a suppression of the different strata which, in the old continent, separate zechstein from Jura limestone. The sandstone of Cocollar, which sometimes covers the limestone of Cumanacoa, may be considered as variegated sandstone, but it is more probable that in alternating by layers with the limestone of Cumanacoa, it is sometimes thrown to the upper limit of the formation to which it belongs. The zechstein of Europe also contains a very quartzose sandstone. The two limestone strata of Cumanacoa and Caripa succeed immediately each other, like alpine and Jura limestone, on the western declivity of the Mexican tableland, between Sopilote, Mescala, and Tehuilotepec. These formations, perhaps, pass from one to the other, so that the latter may be only an upper shelf of zechstein. This immediate covering, this suppression of interposed soils, this simplicity of structure and absence of oolitic strata have been equally observed in Upper Silesia and in the Pyrenees. On the other hand, the immediate superposition of the limestone of Cumanacoa on mica slate and transition clay slate, the rarity of the petrifactions which have not yet been sufficiently examined, the strata of silex passing to Lydian stone, may lead to the belief that the soils of Cumanacoa and Caripe are of a much more ancient formation than the secondary rocks. We must not be surprised that the doubts which arise in the mind of the geologist when endeavouring to decide on the relative age of the limestone of the high mountains in the Pyrenees, the Apennines, south of the Lake of Perugia, and in the Swiss Alps, should extend to the limestone strata of the high mountains of New Andalusia, and everywhere in America where the presence of red sandstone is not distinctly recognized. End of chapter 3.32, part 13. Chapter 3.32, part 14, of Personal Narrative of Travels to the Equinoctial Regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, Volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt. Translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Chapter 3.32, Part 14. 9. Sandstone of the Bergantin. Between Nueva Barcelona and the Cerro del Bergantin, a quartzose sandstone covers the Jura limestone of Cumanacoa. Is it an arenaceous rock analogous to green sandstone, or does it belong to the sandstone of Cocollar? In the latter case, its presence seems to prove still more clearly that the limestones of Cumanacoa and Caripe are only two parts of the same system, alternating with sandstone, sometimes quartzose, sometimes slaty. 10. Gypsum of the Llanos of Venezuela. Deposits of lamellar gypsum containing numerous strata of marl are found in patches on the steppes of Caracas and Barcelona, for instance, in the tableland of San Diego, between Ortiz and the Mesa de Paja, and near the mission of Cajipo. They appear to me to cover the Jura limestone of Tisnao, which is analogous to that of Caripe, where we find it mixed with masses of fibrous gypsum. I have not given the name formation either to the sandstone of the Orinoco, of Cocollar, or of Bergantin, or to the gypsum of the Llanos, because nothing as yet proves the independence of those arenaceous and gypsous soils. I think it will one day be ascertained that the gypsum of the Llanos covers not only the Jura limestone of the Llanos, but that it is sometimes enclosed in it like the gypsum of the Golfo Triste on the east of the alpine limestone of Cumanacoa. The great masses of sulphur found in the layers, almost entirely clayey, of the steppes, at Guayuta, valley of San Bonifacio, Buen Pastor, confluence of the Rio Pao with the Orinoco, may possibly belong to the marl of the gypsum of Ortiz. These clayey beds are more worthy of attention, since the interesting observations of Von Buch and several other celebrated geologists respecting the cavernosity of gypsum, the irregularity of the inclination of its strata, and its parallel position with the two declivities of the Harz and the upheaved chain of the Alps, while the simultaneous presence of sulphur, ologist iron, and the sulphurous acid vapours, which precede the formation of sulphuric acid, seem to manifest the action of forces placed at a great depth in the interior of the globe. 11. Formation of muriatiferous clay with bitumen and lamellar gypsum of the peninsula of Araya. This soil presents a striking analogy with salzthon or Lieberstein, muriatiferous clay, which I have found accompanying gem salt in every zone. In the salt pits of Araya, it attracted the attention of Peter Martyr d'Anguera at the beginning of the 16th century. It probably facilitated the rupture of the earth and the formation of the Gulf of Cariaco. This clay is of a smoky colour, impregnated with petroleum, mingled with lamellar and lenticular gypsum, and sometimes traversed by small veins of fibrous gypsum. It encloses angular and less friable masses of dark brown clay with a slaty and sometimes conchoidal fracture. Muriate of soda is found in particles invisible to the naked eye. The relations of positions or superposition between this soil and the tertiary rocks does not appear sufficiently clear to enable me to pronounce with certainty on this element, the most important of positive geology. The coordinate layers of gem salt, muriatiferous clay, and gypsum present the same difficulties in both hemispheres. These masses, the forms of which are very irregular, everywhere exhibit traces of great commotions. They are scarcely ever covered by independent formations, and after having been long believed in Europe that gem salt was exclusively peculiar to alpine and transition limestone, it is now still more generally admitted, either from reasoning founded on analogy or from superposition on the prolongation of the strata, that the true location of gem salt is found in variegated sandstone, bunter Sandstein. Sometimes gem salt appears to oscillate between variegated sandstone and Muschelkalk. I made 2 excursions on the peninsula of Araya. In the first, I was inclined to consider the muriatiferous clay as subordinate to the conglomerate, evidently of tertiary formation, of the Barigón and of the mountain of the castle of Cumana, because a little to the north of that castle I had found shelves of hardened clay containing lamellar gypsum enclosed in the tertiary strata. I believed that the muriatiferous clay might alternate with the calcareous conglomerate of Barigón, and near the fisherman's hut, situated opposite Macanao, conglomerate rocks appeared to me to pierce through the strata of clay. During a second excursion to Maniquarez and the aluminiferous slates of Chaparuparu, the connection between tertiary strata and bituminous clay seemed to me somewhat problematical. I examined more particularly the Peñas Negras near the Cerro de la Vela, east-southeast of the ruined castle of Araya. The limestone of the Peñas is compact, bluish-grey, and almost destitute of petrifactions. It appeared to me to be much more ancient than the tertiary conglomerate of Barigón, and I saw it covering in concordant position a clayey slate somewhat analogous to muriatiferous clay. I was greatly interested in comparing this latter formation with the strata of carburetted marl contained in the alpine limestone of Cumanacoa. According to the opinions now most generally received, the rock of the Peñas Negras may be considered as representing Muschelkalk, limestone of Göttingen, and the saliferous and bituminous clay of Araya as representing variegated sandstone, but these problems can only be solved when the mines of those countries are worked. Those geologists who are of opinion that the gem salt of Italy penetrates into a stratum above the Jura limestone and even the chalk may be led to mistake the limestone of the Peñas Negras for one of the strata of compact limestone without grains of quartz and petrifactions, which are frequently found amidst the tertiary conglomerate of Barigón and of the Castillo de Cumana. The saliferous clay of Araya would appear to them analogous to the plastic clay of Paris. Note: tertiary sandstone with lignites or molasses of Argovia. End of note. Or to the clayey shelves, DF et Tortilla, of secondary sandstone with lignites containing salt springs in Belgium and Westphalia. However difficult it may be to distinguish separately the strata of marl and clay belonging to variegated sandstone, Muschelkalk, Quadersandstein, Jura limestone, secondary sandstone with lignites, green and iron sand, and the tertiary strata lying above chalk, I believe that the bitumen which everywhere accompanies gem salt, and most frequently salt springs, characterizes the muriatiferous clay of the peninsula of Araya and the island of Margarita, as linked with formations lying below the tertiary strata. I do not say that they are anterior to that formation, for since the publication of M. von Buch's observations on the Tyrol, we must no longer consider what is below in space as necessarily anterior relatively to the epoch of its formation. Bitumen and petroleum still issue from the mica slate. These substances are ejected whenever the soil is shaken by a subterranean force, between Cumana, Cariaco, and the Golfo Triste. Now, in the peninsula of Araya, and in the island of Margarita, saliferous clay impregnated with bitumen is met with in connection with this early formation, nearly as gem salt appears in Calabria in flakes, in basins enclosed in strata of granite and gneiss. Do these circumstances serve to support that ingenious system, according to which all the coordinate formations of gypsum, sulfur, bitumen, and gem salt, constantly anhydrous, result from floods passing across the crevices which have traversed the oxidated crust of our planet and penetrating to the seat of volcanic action? The enormous masses of muriate of soda recently thrown up by Vesuvius. Note: the ejected masses in 1822 were so considerable that the inhabitants of some villages round Vesuvius collected them for domestic purposes. End of note. The small veins of that salt, which I have often seen traverse the most recently ejected lavas, and of which the origin, by sublimation, appears similar to that of ologist iron deposited in the same vents. Note: Gail on the action of volcanoes in the Annales de Chimie, volume 22, page 148, end of note. The layers of gem salt and saliferous clay of the trichytic soil in the plains of Peru and around the volcano of the Andes of Quito are well worthy of the attention of geologists who would discuss the origin of formations. In the present sketch, I confine myself to the mere enumeration of the phenomena of position, indicating at the same time some theoretic views by which observers, in more advantageous circumstances than I was myself, may direct their researches. 12. Agglomerate limestone of the Barrigón, of the castle of Cumaná, and of the vicinity of Porto Cabello. This is a very complex formation, presenting that mixture and that periodical return of compact limestone, quartzose sandstone, and conglomerates, limestone breccia, which in every zone peculiarly characterizes the tertiary strata. It forms the mountain of the castle of San Antonio, near the town of Cumaná, the southwest extremity of the peninsula of Araya, the Cerro Miapire, south of Caraco, and the vicinity of Porto Cabello. It contains 1. A compact limestone, generally of a whitish grey or yellowish white, Cerro de Barrigón, some very thin layers of which are entirely destitute of petrifactions, while others are filled with cardites, ostracites, pectins, and vestiges of lithophyte polypi. 2. A breccia, in which an innumerable number of pelagic shells are found, mixed with grains of quartz, agglutinated by a cement of carbonate of lime. 3. A calcareous sandstone, with very fine rounded grains of quartz, Punta Arenas, west of the village of Maniquarez, and containing masses of brown iron ore. 4. Banks of marl and slaty clay, containing no spangles of mica, but enclosing selenite and lamellar gypsum. These banks of clay appeared to me constantly to form the lower strata. There also belongs to this tertiary stratum the limestone tufa, freshwater formation, of the valleys of Aragua near Vitoria, and the fragmentary rock of Cabo Blanco, westward of the port of La Guaira. I must not designate the latter by the name of nagelfluh, because that term indicates rounded fragments, while the fragments of Cabo Blanco are generally angular and composed of gneiss, hyaline quartz, and chloritic slate, joined by a limestone cement. This cement contains magnetic sand. Note: this magnetic sand no doubt owes its origin to chloritous slate, which in these latitudes forms the bed of the sea. End of note. Madrepores and vestiges of bivalve seashells. The different fragments of tertiary strata which I found in the littoral Cordillera of Venezuela, on the two slopes of the northern chain, seem to be superposed near Cumaná, between Bordones and Punta Delgada, in the Cerro de Miapire, on the alpine limestone of Cumanacoa, between Porto Cabello and the Rio Guayguaza, as well as in the valleys of Aragua, on granite, on the western declivity of the hill formed by Cabo Blanco, on gneiss, and in the peninsula of Araya, on saliferous clay. But this is perhaps merely the effect of apposition. Note: an nicht Auflagerung, according to the precise language of the geologists of my country. End of note. If we would range the different members of the tertiary series, according to the age of their formation, we ought, I believe, to regard the breccia of Cabo Blanco, with fragments of primitive rocks, as the most ancient, and make it be succeeded by the arenaceous limestone of the castle of Cumaná, without horn silex, yet somewhat analogous to the coarse limestone of Paris and the freshwater soil of Victoria. The clayey gypsum, mixed with calcareous breccia with madrepores, cardites, and oysters, which I found between Cartagena and the Cerro de la Popa, and the equally recent limestones of Guadeloupe and Barbados, limestones filled with seashells resembling those now existing in the Caribbean Sea, prove that the latest deposited strata of the tertiary formation extend far towards the west and north. These recent formations, so rich in vestiges of organized bodies, furnish a vast field of observation to those who are familiar with the zoological character of rocks. To examine these vestiges in strata superposed as by steps, one above another, is to study the fauna of different ages and to compare them together. The geography of animals marks out limits in space, according to the diversity of climates, which determine the actual state of vegetation on our planet. The geology of organized bodies, on the contrary, is a fragment of the history of nature, taking the word history in its proper acceptation. It describes the inhabitants of the earth according to succession of time. We may study genera and species in museums, but the fauna of different ages, the predominance of certain shells, the numerical relations which characterize the animal kingdom, and the vegetation of a place or of a period should be studied in sight of those formations. It has long appeared to me that in the tropics, as well as in the temperate zone, the species of univalve shells are much more numerous than bivalves. From this superiority in number, the organic fossil world furnishes, in every latitude, a further analogy with the intertropical shells that now live at the bottom of the ocean. In fact, M. de France, in a work full of new and ingenious ideas, not only recognizes this predominance of the univalves in the number of the species, but also observes that out of 5,500 fossil, univalve, bivalve, and multivalve shells contained in his rich collections, there are 3,066 univalve, 2,108 bivalve, and 326 multivalve. The univalve fossils are therefore to the bivalve as 3 to 2. Note. Table of Organized Fossil Bodies, 1824. End of note. 13. Formation of pyroxenic, amygdaloid, and phonolite between Ortiz and Cerro de Flores. I place pyroxenic, amygdaloid, and phonolite, Porphyrschiefer, at the end of the formations of Venezuela, not as being the only rocks which I consider as pyrogenous, but as those of which the volcanic origin is probably posterior to the tertiary strata. This conclusion is not deduced from the observations I made at the southern declivity of the Littoral Cordillera, between the Morros of San Juan, Parapara, and the Llanos of Calabozo. In that region, local circumstances would possibly lead us to regard the amygdaloids of Ortiz as linked to a system of transition rocks, amphibolic serpentine, diorite, and carburetted slate of Malpaso. But the eruptions of the trachytes across rocks posterior to the chalk in the Euganean Mountains and other parts of Europe, joined to the phenomenon of total absence of fragments of pyroxenic porphyry, trachyte, basalt, and phonolite. The fragments of these rocks appear only in tufas or conglomerates, which belong essentially to basaltic formations or surround the most recent volcanoes. Every volcanic formation is enveloped in breccia, which is the effect of the eruption itself. In the conglomerates or fragmentary rocks, anterior to the recent tertiary strata, renders it probable that the appearance of trap rocks at the surface of the earth is the effect of one of the last revolutions of our planet, even where the eruption has taken place by crevices, veins, which cross gneiss granite, or the transition rocks not covered by secondary and tertiary formations. The small volcanic stratum of Ortiz, latitude 9 degrees, 28 minutes to 9 degrees 36 minutes, formed the ancient shore of the vast basin of the Llanos of Venezuela. It is composed, on the points where I could examine it, of only two kinds of rocks, namely, amygdaloid and phonolite. The grayish-blue amygdaloid contains fendilated crystals of pyroxene and mesotype. It forms balls with concentric layers, of which the flattened center is nearly as hard as basalt. Neither olivine nor amphibole can be distinguished. Before it shows itself as a separate stratum, rising in small conic hills, the amygdaloid seems to alternate by layers with the diorite, which we have mentioned above as mixed with carburetted slate and amphibolic serpentine. These close relations of rocks, so different in appearance, and so likely to embarrass the observer, give great interest to the vicinity of Ortiz. If the masses of diorite and amygdaloid, which appear to us to be in layers, are very large veins, they may be supposed to have been formed and upheaved simultaneously. We are now acquainted with two formations of amygdaloid. One, the most common, is subordinate to the basalt, the other much more rare. Note. We find examples of the latter in Norway, Vardekullen near Skien, in the mountains of the Thuringia Wald, in South Tyrol, at Heffeld in the Harz, at Bolanos in Mexico, etc. Belongs to the pyroxenic porphyry. Note. Black porphyries of M. von Buch. End of note. The amygdaloid of Ortiz approaches, by its eryctognostic characters, to the former of those formations, and we are almost surprised to find it joining not basalt, but phonolite, an eminently feldspathic rock, in which we find some crystals of amphibole, but pyroxene very rarely, and never any olivine. Note. There are phonolites of basaltic strata, the most anciently known, and phonolites of trachytic strata, Andes of Mexico. The former are generally above the basalts, and the extraordinary development of feldspar in that union and the want of pyroxene have always appeared to me very remarkable phenomena. End of note. The Cerro de Flores is a hill covered with tabular blocks of greenish-grey phonolite, enclosing long crystals, not fendilated, of vitreous feldspar, altogether analogous to the phonolite of Mittelgebirge. It is surrounded by pyroxenic amygdaloid. It would no doubt be seen below, issuing immediately from gneiss granite, like the phonolite of Berliner Stein in Bohemia, which contains fragments of gneiss embedded in its mass. Does there exist in South America another group of rocks, which may be preferentially designated by the name of volcanic rocks, and which are as distinct from the chain of the Andes, and advance as far towards the east, as the group that bounds the steppes of the Calabozo? Of this I doubt, at least in that part of the continent situated north of the Amazon. I have often directed attention to the absence of pyroxenic porphyry, trachyte, basalt, and lavas. I range these formations according to their relative age in the whole of America eastward of the Cordilleras. The existence even of trachyte has not yet been verified in the Sierra Nevada de Merida, which links the Andes and the littoral chain of Venezuela. It would seem as if volcanic fire, after the formation of primitive rocks, could not pierce into eastern America. Possibly the scarcity of argentiferous veins observed in those countries may be owing to the absence of more recent volcanic phenomena. M. Eschwege saw at Brazil some layers, veins, of diorite, but neither trachyte, basalt, dolerite, nor amygdaloid, and he was therefore much surprised to see, in the vicinity of Rio Janeiro, an insulated mass of phonolite, exactly similar to that of Bohemia, piercing through gneiss. I am inclined to believe that America, on the east of the Andes, would have burning volcanoes if, near the shore of Venezuela, Guyana, and Brazil, the series of primitive rocks were broken by trachytes, for these, by their fendillation and open crevices, seem to establish that permanent communication between the surface of the soil and the interior of the globe, which is the indispensable condition of the existence of a volcano. If we direct our course from the coast of Paria by the gneiss granite of the Silla of Caracas, the red sandstone of Barquisimeto and Tocuyo, the slaty mountains of the Sierra Nevada de Merida, and the eastern Cordillera of Cundinamarca to Popoyan and Pasto, taking the direction of west-southwest, we find in the vicinity of those towns the first volcanic vents of the Andes still burning, those which are the most northerly of all South America, and it may be remarked that those craters are found where the Cordilleras begin to present trachytes, at a distance of 18 or 25 leagues from the present coast of the Pacific Ocean. Note: I believe the first hypotheses respecting the relation between the burning of volcanoes and the proximity of the sea are contained in Etna Dialogus, a very eloquent though little known work by Cardinal Bembo. End of note. Permanent communications, or at least communications frequently renewed, between the atmosphere and the interior of the globe have been preserved only along that immense crevice on which the Cordillera have been upheaved. But subterranean volcanic forces are not less active in eastern America, shaking the soil of the littoral Cordillera of Venezuela and of the Parima group. In describing the phenomena which accompany the great earthquake of Caracas on the 26th March 1812, I mentioned the detonations heard at different periods in the mountains, altogether granitic, of the Orinoco. Note: I stated in another place the influence of that great catastrophe on the counter-revolution which the royalist party succeeded in bringing about at the time in Venezuela. It is impossible to conceive anything more curious than the negotiation opened on the 5th of April by the Republican government established at Valencia in the valleys of Aragua with Bishop Prat, Don Narciso Colli Prat, to engage him to publish a pastoral letter calculated to tranquilize the people respecting the wrath of the deity. The archbishop was permitted to say that this wrath was merited on account of the disorder of morals, but he was enjoined to declare positively that politics and systematic opinions on the new social order had nothing in common with it. Archbishop Prat lost his liberty after this singular correspondence. End of note. The elastic forces which agitate the ground, the still burning volcanoes, the hot sulphurous springs, sometimes containing fluoric acid, the presence of asphaltum and naphtha in primitive strata, all point to the interior of our planet, the high temperature of which is perceived even in mines of little depth, and which, from the times of Heraclitus, of Ephesus, and Anaxagoras of Clazomene, to the Platonic theory of modern days, has been considered as the seat of all great disturbances of the globe. I have thought it right to give at some length this geologic description of South America, not only on account of the novel interest which the study of the formations in the equinoctial regions is calculated to excite, but also on account of the honourable efforts which have been made recently in Europe to verify and extend the working of the mines in the Cordilleras of Mexico, Colombia, Chile, and Buenos Aires. Vast sums of money have been invested for the attainment of this useful end. In proportion as public confidence has enlarged and consolidated those enterprises from which both continents may derive solid advantage, it becomes the duty of persons who have acquired a local knowledge of these countries to publish information calculated to create a just appreciation of the relative wealth and position of the mines in different parts of Spanish America. The success of a company for the working of mines, and that of works undertaken by the order of free governments, is far from depending solely on the improvement of the machines employed for draining off the water and extracting the mineral, on the regular and economical distribution of the subterraneous works, or the improvements in preparation, amalgamation, and melting. Success depends also on a thorough knowledge of the different superposed strata. The practice of the science of mining is closely linked with the progress of geology, and it would be easy to prove that many millions of piastres have been rashly expended in South America from complete ignorance of the nature of the formations and the position of the rocks in directing the preliminary researches. At the present time, it is not precious metals solely which should fix the attention of new mining companies. The multiplication of steam engines renders it indispensable, wherever wood is not abundant or easy of transport, to seek at the same time to discover coal and lignites. In this point of view, the precise knowledge of the red sandstone, coal sandstone, quadersandstein, and molasses, tertiary formation of lignites, often covered with basalt and dolerite, is of great practical importance. It is difficult for a European miner recently arrived to judge of a country presenting so novel an aspect, and when the same formations cover an immense extent. I hope that the present work, as well as my political essay on New Spain and my work on the position of rocks in the two hemispheres, will contribute to diminish those obstacles. They may be said to contain the earliest geologic information respecting places whose subterraneous wealth attracts the attention of commercial nations, and they will assist in the classification of the more precise notions which later researches may add to my labours. The Republic of Colombia, in its present limits, furnishes a vast field for the enterprising spirit of the miner. Gold, platinum, silver, mercury, copper, gem salt, sulphur, and alum may become objects of important workings. The production of gold alone amounted, before the outbreak of the political dissensions, on the average to 4,700 kilograms, 20,500 marks of Castile, per annum. This is nearly half the quantity furnished by all Spanish America, a quantity which has an influence the more powerful on the variable proportions between the value of gold and silver, as the extraction of the former metal has diminished at Brazil for 40 years past with surprising rapidity. The quint, a tax which the government raises on gold washings, which in the Capitania of Minas Gerais was, in 1756, 1761, and 1767, from 102 and 85 arrobas of gold, or 14 3/5 kilograms, has fallen during 1800, 1813, and 1818 to 30, 20, and 9 arrobas, an arrob of gold having, at Rio Janeiro, the value of 15,000 cruzados. According to these estimates, the produce of gold in Brazil, making deductions for fraudulent exportation, was, in the middle of the 18th century, the years of the greatest prosperity of the gold washings, 6,600 kilograms, and in our days, from 1817 to 1820, 600 kilograms less. In the province of Sao Paulo, the extraction of gold has entirely ceased. In the province of Goiás, It was 803 kilograms in 1793, and in 1819 scarcely 75. In the province of Mato Grosso it is almost nothing, and M. Eschwege is of opinion that the whole produce of gold in Brazil does not amount at present to more than 600,000 cruzados, scarcely 440 kilograms. I dwell on these particulars because, in confounding the different periods of the riches and poverty of the gold washings of Brazil, it is still affirmed, in works treating of the commerce of the precious metals, that a quantity of gold equivalent to 4 millions of piastres, 5,800 kilograms of gold, flows into Europe annually from Portuguese America. Note: this error is twofold. It is probable that Brazilian gold, paying the quint, has not, during the last 40 years, risen to 5,500 kilograms. I heretofore shared this error in common with writers on political economy, in admitting that the quint in 1810 was still, instead of 26 arrobas, or 379 kilograms, 51,200 Portuguese ounces, or 1,433 kilograms, which supposed a product of 7,165 kilograms. The very correct information afforded by 2 Portuguese manuscripts on the gold washings of Minas Gerais, Minas Novas, and Goiás, in the Bullion Report for the House of Commons, 1810, Ac. page 29, goes as far only as 1794, from the Quinto de Oro of Brazil, was 53 arrobas, which indicates a produce of more than 3,900 kilograms, paying the quint. In Mr. Tooke's important work on High and Low Prices, Part 2, page 2, this produce is still estimated, mean year 1810 to 1821, at 1,736,000 piastres, while, according to official documents in my possession, the average of the quint of those years amounted only to 15 arrobas, or a product quint of 1,095 kilograms, or 755,000 piastres. Mr. John Allen reminded the committee of the Bullion Report, in his critical notes on the table of M. Brongniart, that the decrease of the produce of the gold washings of Brazil had been extremely rapid since 1794, and the notions given by M. Auguste de Saint-Hilaire indicate the same desertion of the gold mines of Brazil. Those who were miners have become cultivators. The value of an arroba of gold is 15,000 Brazilian cruzados, each cruzado being 50 sous. According to M. Franzini, the Portuguese onca is equivalent to 0.28 of a kilogram, and 8 oncas make 1 mark, 2 marks make 1 aratel, and 32 aratels 1 arroba. End of note. If in commercial value gold in grains prevails in the Republic of Colombia over the value of other metals, the latter are not on that account less worthy to fix the attention of government and of individuals. The argentiferous mines of Santa Ana, Manta, Santo Cristo de las Lajas, Pamplona, Sapo, and La Vega de Sapia afford great hope. The facility of the communications between the coast of Colombia and that of Europe imparts the same interest to the copper mines of Venezuela and New Granada. Metals are a merchandise purchased at the price of labour and in advance of capital, thus forming in the countries where they are produced a portion of commercial wealth, while their extraction gives an impetus to industry in the most barren and mountainous districts. End of chapter 3.32, part 14. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. And this is the end of the personal narrative of travels to the equinoctial regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804 by Alexander von Humboldt, translated by Thomasina Ross.